the pain is there because you're leaving home, which is
Yeah.
Philippines,
Right.
but you don't know what's ahead of you, which is already the opportunities that you have. Like, I did not see like these people here are so welcoming. Like, really? Like, I was really like flabbergasted with all
Right.
what happened.
The District 5 School-Related Employee of the Year from Rochelle's School of the Arts, Tiffany Berrien.
My motto is student first, athlete second, because I've been in their shoes before, and I know what it takes now that I'm older and mature. So I just try to instill in them that it's fun to be a kid. It's fun to go to school. It's fun to be around your family. The sports is just an extra tool. I just like to love on them, just be a good mentor and instill leadership, life lessons, something that they could take with them the rest of their life.
She instills grades first before the actual sport. She instills family before the kid. You know, she tries to get that mentality of like, it's not just about you, it's about your last name, not your first name. And I think that's really something that maybe they're not used to hearing. They're all about me, 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 and she's like, no, step back. It's about your family, it's about your grades, and then it's about what you want to do and what you want to accomplish.
Coach Tiffany is a really great part of our school. She is a tremendous asset at our PE department, in our library, in our cafeterias. She just gets all over the campus and she helps us in so many places. She always does it with a smile on her face, and she's always willing to help out. And if she has to step into a classroom to assist, she is welcomed by the kids, and everybody's always so glad to see her.
She's a good person overall, and she makes me feel good about myself. She makes me want to try harder, stuff like that. She really encourages me to do my best and do better at things. She's a really good person, and I love her personally. I really do. And she's a very important person to me.
I want them to remember me as she's tough, but it's out of love. They know behind the smiles when it's time to get serious. When I go coach mode, PE mode, I'm serious because I know what it takes. And just take that. It's out of love. And one day down the road, you'll understand and you'll come back and say, because of Coach Tiffany, this is why.
I went in thinking, you know, this is going to be difficult. I'm going to be uncomfortable. They're going to make me say things or do things that I'm not comfortable doing yet because I don't have the teaching experience. When in reality, it was laid back but productive because we were still able to have some of these difficult conversations and difficult techniques that might be hard when you're a first-year teacher, but in a productive manner where it wasn't intimidating at all. In fact, it was rewarding.
That name speaks for itself. All teachers, whether you are a new teacher, whether you are a second career professional, whether you are a veteran teacher, whether you are a teacher just somewhere in the middle, whether you teach athletics, whether you teach physics, this is where you will get that understanding of how to directly impact student achievement. And that is so important, and it is so worth your time.
Through Extending Excellence, I was energized with the new strategies and things I was learning with the different programs we were implementing. And Catherine, one of my mentees, showed me different technologies she was using in her classroom, and I was able to share some of the different strategies I've used over the years that have worked. And with that, you're building that bridge from one generation of teachers to the next generation of teachers, and that's so important because we can learn so much from each other.
Because in your first few years of teaching, I mean, it's super overwhelming. Sometimes you feel like you're drowning. So to have someone that's there for you, especially not at your school, I really like the idea of being able to collaborate with, since Polk County is so spread out, collaborating with people that have different ideas, different backgrounds, different demographics at their school to collaborate with and bring to the table.
Just having somebody there to say, hey, I was there, I'm here for you, anything you need, and not feeling so nervous, because sometimes when you go, going to admin is kind of scary sometimes, especially when you're brand new to the school. So having somebody that I felt was more on my level that I could talk to, so I wanted to make sure I was also that for other people.
The biggest impact for me was to see teachers week by week gain that confidence in their classroom and taking that criticism and just really turning it to something beautiful, and then turning it around and taking those risks in their classroom with their students.
Good morning, and we will call this work session of April 26th, 2022 to order. And I will start by reading our Who Are We statement. We are the Polk County Leadership Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to define us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and experiences to ensure that our decisions are focused on providing a high-quality education for all students. The four most important things to our governance team are operating with integrity, respecting our students, staff, family, and each other, establishing a culture where our stakeholders feel valued, supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth, and supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children we serve and find avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There is no acceptable alternative. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for each student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because we will remain committed to supporting the whole child. We hope to engage and empower our students and stakeholders to create a community of lifelong learners. And with that, I will turn it over to Superintendent Hyde.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, staff, and community members. Thank you for being here today. Several items on today's workshop. Some are largely informational and a review. Some will provide me additional context before moving forward. And others are in order for us to continue to serve and function in a transparent manner as to the procedures and policies that we enact as a school district. First two items up before you are charter school items. I will ask Ms. Candy Amato to please come to the microphone. The first item up today is the Berkeley Accelerated Middle School contract.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So the Berkeley Accelerated Contract, the vote at the last meeting was back in the fall, was to renew Berkeley Accelerated Middle for a 15-year contract. What you have in front of you is, after negotiating and working with Berkeley Accelerated Middle, the contract that we would then put in place beginning July 1 of 22 and running through the end of June 30th, 2037. It is following the standard contract issued by the state with modifications as needed. For example, they will now be serving students grades 6 through 10. They are increasing their capacity up to 650 students during the duration of their contract. They will still maintain in their same location. We have added the component about the governance, where their meetings will be held in Polk County, and members of the board will be Polk County residents. And that pretty much about sums up their contract. It's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty simple. So that is all we have for you in regards to their contract.
Any questions from the board on the Berkeley contract?
Okay.
Not seeing any, we'll move to item number 2. The Charter Review Team's recommendation to the superintendent on Matter Academy Davenport Middle School.
So good afternoon again. I'd like to bring up Ms. Vicki Mace. As you know, she is our outside consultant who does provide a wealth of knowledge and an outside perspective as we are reviewing and navigating through each of these contracts.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's always nice to be back to Polk County. So I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible, save some time at the end for questions, and so to be respectful of your time. If you want to slow me down, just let me know, but try to go through as quickly as we can. So today we're going to look at Matter, 22 Matter Academy Davenport Middle School. And one of the things that is different about this year right off the bat, I'm not normally here in April, and so the charter schools now can submit their applications and open at a time that are determined by the applicant. So actually, this is a new statute, and so it's why I'm greeting you in April instead of during the summer or fall. The model charter application for high-performing charter schools or charter school system, it uses an abbreviated charter application. If you might have looked at the application, they're not as thick, not as many sections. They're guided by different statutes, which we will have to look at today. And this school is replicating a high-performing charter school, which is Matter Academy Middle School. It's MSID 136012. And Matter has lots of schools, and so I'm grateful that they give us the MSID number so that we can do our due diligence. This is a different school than what they applied with last year in the 2021 application. Last year, they had Matter Academy Bay Middle School, and we denied the application, or you did as a board, mostly because of misrepresentation of facts. That particular school had a deficit fund balance, unassigned balance, of $71,960. I'd like to tell you today that the school that they're bringing forward does have a positive fund balance, and we'll get to that in a minute. Just on an interesting note, I looked at doing due diligence. I went back and looked at that school. Their fund balance for the year ending June 30, 2021 for the school that they submitted last year is now negative $271,440. So that position did not change or improve since our last time together. So the new school that they are recommending to replicate is Matter Academy Middle School. It does have an unassigned fund balance of $3,812,395. It is co-located with 2 other schools, the Matter Academy High School as well as the Matter Performing Arts and Entertainment Academy. The projected enrollment for year 1 is grade 6 with 154 students, growing into a 6-8 school with 594 students at year 5. We're a little bit out of sync on this application process because of the statutory deadlines imposed by the state of Florida. We met on, the charter review team met on April 5th, and then the applicant actually presented to you on April 12th. That's usually, it's backwards what we normally do. And today I'm here because of the superintendent's recommendation, and on May 10th you will be voting whether to approve or deny this charter application. Our team is a great team. Polk County should take a lot of pride in the team. They have key district staff, community members. We have 3 community members, charter schools department, a charter school representative, and then I serve as the external evaluator or the consultant. And it's important to know that each of the charter team representatives, they individually review the charter application prior to us meeting. We did have one meeting this year on April 5th. It was a Zoom meeting. At that meeting, we have group discussions. We look at our strengths. We look at the concerns, the questions. Members have an opportunity to advocate for that charter school to be approved, and then the members of the team vote. So the process has changed the same. I always enjoy being the external evaluator. I like to remind the board, and Miss Lori, she smiles every time because I say, I don't understand the politics of your district, so I can just look at the merits of the application, which I think is a good process. The review team, when they're looking at their recommendations, they're looking at the merit of the charter application, they're looking at the capacity interview, they're looking at the applicant's capacity to govern, and they're also looking at the due diligence. And I think that's also where it's important to have an external evaluator, because I really like doing the due diligence. I like digging in and finding things that perhaps your staff doesn't have time to find. And that allows your district staff to stay focused on the mission of the organization. And so I can do a lot more of the work and find some of the due diligence every time. I apologize for this label. It should say financial solvency, but forgot to put that one in. I think I forgot to save on the last edit, so I apologize for that title slide. But I know given a green light to a charter school to open, it's a weighty decision. I know that. And the budget plays a key important part because you want to know that the charter school is solvent, that it can operate in the first few years of its operation. The heart of the budget process, it should be something that, it's an estimation process. We know that it's not perfect science, but it should give the district the confidence that the applicant considered all his expenses, particularly those described in the application narrative, as well as personnel to capably serve the students. And so as you move forward, it should give you a vote of confidence. The charter review team, I do have to tell you, has reservations about this budget, and we'll talk about them more in detail. But it's also important to know that this particular applicant has the backing of Matter Academy, Inc., which is a reputable organization in the state with many charter schools. The capacity interview, I think, is key, particularly this time because the application is so abbreviated. We were able to ask lots of questions. The capacity interview with the governing board, you should be able to assess the applicant's understanding and capacity to implement the program successfully, gauge how familiar they are with your community, resolve any major questions not answered in the written proposal, and I think that was really key this time, and provide additional evidence to either support or deny the charter application. So one of the things that we couldn't ignore as the charter review team was that a charter replication, a high-performing charter school or charter school system, it operates under different statutes. And these statutes came into play, I think, it was a big decision in the charter review team's recommendation. So they're guided by different statutes, either for a high-performing charter school or for a high-performing charter school system. And in this case, the applicant provided letters from the Department of Education stating that it was still a high-performing charter school system and that the school that it was replicating was one that was approved by the Department of Education. So we're going to look at some of the other statutes that we had to pay attention to. In the case of a high-performing charter school or charter school system, you can only deny a charter application of high-performing charter school if it does not materially comply with the requirements found in Section 1002.336A. These are the same that you would find in the other applications. The difference here is that only way that you could deny for one of those requirements is if the school does not materially comply with that requirement. And we'll get into that definition. So we're looking still at the guiding principles, we're looking at the curriculum plan, we're looking at improving student performance, do we have our measurable objectives, the reading curriculum, do we have differentiated strategies, and of course the financial plan, anticipated fund balances, are they giving us good revenue projections based on their expenses and their revenue. So, but we cannot ignore the fact that you can only deny if one of these requirements does not materially comply. Other statutes for the high-performing replication is the charter school proposed in the application does not materially comply with requirements in Statute 1002.33, Section 9, A through F. A through F, we look at that all the time. That's, are they non-sectarian in its programs? Are they accountable to the sponsor for performance? They can't charge tuition or fees other than what other basic public schools can charge. They must meet all applicable state and local health, safety, and civil rights, and they can't be, have any anti-discrimination issues. So we look at those all the time. Also, the proposed charter school's education program cannot does not substantially replicate that of an applicant or one of the applicant's high-performing charter schools. In this case, it has replicated in one of its high-performing schools. The applicant has made a material misrepresentation or false statement or concealed an essential fact. That was our issue last year because we felt that they did not reveal that the school being replicated was actually in a negative unassigned fund balance. This year, we have not found any misrepresentation of facts. And the proposed charter school's education program and that and is a big word, financial management practices do not materially comply with the requirements of 1002.33 Section 6. The definition of material noncompliance, it's a tongue twister here, a failure to follow requirements of a violation of prohibitions applicable to charter school applications, which failure is quantitatively or qualitatively significant either individually or when aggregated with other noncompliance. And so we had to watch that statute as we were doing our evaluation. So as we get into our strengths and concerns, I just hope that you have some idea that it wasn't a regular standard application, that these other charter statutes did guide us in making the recommendation. Strengths. We like to talk about strengths, but it seems like I bring lots of concerns to you. The strengths, it's replicating a successful charter school. It has a really good unassigned fund balance. It is supported by a large organization, like I told you earlier, Matter Academy, Inc. It's a recipient of a federal replication grant to open new charter schools. It's received $58 million from the United States Department of Education. That is a large grant. And the educational program, curriculum, and instructional design was really one of the better ones that we have seen. It's also, I think, important to note that at the presentation, Ms. Sanchez, the principal, stated that about 60 students, I think it was, from Osceola County perhaps would be coming back to Polk County. That was a strength. And also, everyone has really enjoyed Ms. Sanchez's enthusiasm. That was obvious at the presentation to the board as well as the charter capacity interview. And so she's worked really well, has had really good communication with the staff. It's been very positive. So we found that as a positive because that's not always the case as you're opening new charter schools. Concerns. I think it might just have been a pet peeve of mine, but they didn't make a lot of changes to the charter application. And generally, when we have those that come back and resubmit, they take what the CRT team wrote and in the evaluation, and they try to correct some of the stated concerns. There were not a lot of stated concerns corrected here or even explained, I think, in more detail, which is what the CR team was looking for. But they did make the demographic changes of the replicated school. They did make, they used the baseline data for the replicated school and the measurement for their goals for student achievement. They did change the parent survey administration date. They did change how they were going to share a student assessment with the parents. Instructional materials for the ELA, there were some new materials there. And they did change the history worksheets. And so what I do when we have two evaluations or applications, I set them side by side and I literally go word by word to look for changes. And so I can tell you that we were a little disappointed that some of the major concerns that were voiced last year were not addressed. One of the other things that we didn't know how to really evaluate this charter application, and the reason I say this is that Ms. Amato asked in the charter capacity interview, where are the board minutes? Where can we find the board minutes that show that this was approved for submission? And the applicant said, well, it was already approved to submit, so there's not really minutes reflecting on the approval. Then a few minutes later, Ms. Amato said, okay, well, we were really kind of concerned about the fact that some of the changes or concerns were not addressed. And then the applicant came back and said, so we just for the record want to clarify that this is a brand new application that was submitted on replicating a different Matter Academy performing school. So in one breath they were saying, well, it doesn't need to be new approval. Then on the second breath they're telling us it's a new charter application. I was not able to, even as late as yesterday, find the minutes to show that it was approved as a new application. At the other thing was, why did they submit as a 6 through 8 school? And I know that's a question that's always asked. They're a K-5 school, why don't they just add 6th grade? Because a high-performing replicated school can just add capacity. You just have to let the board know on March 1st that you're adding capacity. So we had a little discussion about that. And the applicant said in the interview, I know that this is a 6-8, but really that campus will run and operate like a synergized K-8 school. And so we had some discussions. In that U.S. DOE replication grant that the school, the Matter Academy, Inc. received, they have a 5-year strategic plan. And in that 5-year strategic plan, they have a plan to open 4 charter schools in Polk County. 6-8 is one of those charter schools. And as you know, they already have 1 K-5 approved to open this year. And they plan on opening 2 K-8, 1 6-8, and 1 9-12. So it is meeting the criteria for the grant for them. The other thing, too, is that it gives them an opportunity to obtain additional grant funding, which, I mean, it does help the school with additional grant funding. And we also know that the school is receiving $1.5 million from that replication U.S. Department of Education grant. If the elementary school gets $1.5 million by opening a middle school, they will also get $1.5 million, which is a nice place to be. We don't have many applications coming before you receiving those kind of funds to open up. The concern that we had, though, is when you add 154 students in one grade, it's really difficult to be solvent. It's tough to build a budget for 154 students. Even schools with 300s population, small schools, they struggle finding their break-even points and being solvent the first year of operation. So even though we understand why, it still is a concern that they're only adding 154 kids. The facility. This was a repeated concern. The facility is a 1,250 student campus, and after year 3, it's not big enough to entertain both the elementary and the middle school with their projected enrollment. In year 4, total would be 1,318 students. In year 5, 1,362 students. They didn't give us a lot of information on their backup facility, and so that caused a little bit of concern, because we do know that right now there could be some potential delay for completing the first phase. I do know the applicant said that if someone visited the campus, they would be very pleased. However, it does keep him up at night. I mean, it's something that you cannot control. If they were to have to find a backup facility in Davenport, I understand that that might be problematic to meet the standards that they've created for their school. Serving ESE and ELL students. Unfortunately, and I would hope that maybe this is something that could be changed in the future, but the high-performing charter application in the high-performing charter school and charter school system application does not ask the applicant to address the ESE students. And I think that that's most unfortunate because that is the heart of the school, at least in my personal opinion as a former principal. And I think it's important for the district to understand that you know that these students will be treated in a fair and equitable manner. So that's unfortunate. So what we tried to do is Ms. Amato asked a lot of questions at the capacity interview. We do know that they're projecting 14.4% ESE and 9.4 ELL. So if you look at those numbers for the middle school, that would be 22 students. For the elementary school, it would be 60 students, with a total of 82 students for the first year of operation. We don't still have a good understanding as to what students they're going to serve or how they're going to serve those students. During the capacity interview, the applicant stated all students that enroll in the school will be serviced. If you look at page 42, the 14% of SWD will include students eligible for autism spectrum disorder, deaf or hard of hearing, emotional or behavioral disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impaired, specific learning disabilities, speech impaired, language impaired, or visually impaired. So we also learned at the CRT meeting from Ms. Chris Newman-Lake, the senior manager for ESC, that the current elementary school is doing an inclusion model. So we're going to make an assumption that the middle school is going to follow suit and also do an inclusion model. But unfortunately, we were not able to get those answers at the capacity interview, and they were not required to present that information in the application. But we do know that there's an issue with our staffing for elementary. The middle school does not budget an ESC teacher for the first year of operation. The elementary school, when looking back at their application, had one ESC teacher. So they will have one ESC teacher, as far as we know, for 82 students, and that's problematic. I do believe that at the capacity interview, they have said that they will have, I think, an ESC coordinator, but again, that is not in their staffing plan. So we don't have a real good picture of how we're going to serve these students. The student projections, that's a repeated concern. There's 154 students at first year. There's 7 core teachers and a half of a principal allocation. That's all, 8 total employees for the entire school. That was a repeated concern last year. The narrative didn't change to provide more detail how it was going to be accomplished. We learned that it's going to be a located school during the capacity interview. It seems to be something that they do. It's common for Matter Academy, Inc. to do co-located schools. So sharing the key personnel with the elementary school, it seems to be how they will operate the first year of operation. The other thing that probably was a little concerning is that last year, I don't know if you recall, guidance counselor, there was not one allocated in either elementary or the middle, and that wasn't addressed in this application either. The middle school is not addressing the guidance counselor position. There is one elementary guidance counselor that has been identified according to the principal at the capacity interview. So basically, what we learned at the capacity interview was, yeah, I mean, in general, the way most of our schools work, and will be the same for this school, obviously, you know, our ESC, our ELL, guidance, administration, office, support staff, someone that's doing HR, your registrar, your food services, generally speaking, the majority of the staff will be shared, minus some teachers that will be, you know, based on certification, just allocated you specifically in the middle school. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to find teachers with cross certifications. The other thing is that they reminded us is that those were 7 FTE equivalents, which means that they could have someone hiring for 4 math periods and 2 PE would equal 1 equivalent. And so when we did ask the CRT team, the curriculum folks, can they do it with 7 folks? They said, yeah, they can. It'll be a challenge. And they do have some art, PE, music, and CTE courses for their electives. And so it will be a challenge. But they said it is possible to do it with the 7 FTE equivalents. Other concerns, They didn't delete the reference to the FCAT Science 2.0, which was something simple that could have been done. As you know, it was eliminated in 2016. When they were looking at baseline data, they didn't use the most recent data. They still use the 2019 data, even though you can find Polk County data online. The applicant history worksheets, they do still have one school that was reported incorrectly, and I go through every one of those financial audits, and there are a lot of them. In Matter Gardens Academy, one of their schools has a deficit, unassigned balance of $30,710, but it was reported in the negative, positive on their worksheet. So there was still an issue with their worksheets. Budget concerns. We didn't really know how to evaluate their budget as well, so we had to do some exploration there. Basically, the applicant told us they purposely didn't include the grant dollars. They wanted us to be able to verify that the school could operate just and be sustainable on their current operating dollars. They also said we basically just wanted to say we can be able to be sustainable on the FTE dollars that we earned. And working with Mr. Pitts and Mr. Fowl, I did a financial analysis, which I'll share with you, and it is our conclusion is that they cannot be financially solvent just on their earned FTE. So what we did is we went through and we looked at some positions, because they did state during the capacity interview all the positions they would be sharing. And so we went through, and what I tried to do, and again, I had Jason and JD look at this, is we said, okay, if they're going to share all these positions, at least let's look at the proportionate share. What will the elementary school have to, or middle school have to pay? And it would be 27.11%. So we went through and we looked at the positions. The interesting part on the school administration, one of the conditions of the grant, the USDOE grant, was that a principal was hired a year in advance of opening a school, and they did not project this to happen for this particular school. So we did ask them if they got permission from their program grant manager, and they said that they did. I was not able to find that in conducting due diligence. The other thing, too, is that the administrative assistant was to be hired a year ahead of time as well. They did not do that. They said they had permission from the grant manager to present or open the school the way they're going to open with sharing a principal. So what we basically did is we went through and looked at all the positions, and I'm not going to go through each one of those, but we went through and we tried to say what would the proportionate share be. Some of these might be low, some might be high. I tried to use the budget narrative, what they said at the interview, and we went through. And for example, the custodial service, we only have that as a proportionate share of $5,000. It might be higher because we took the $21,000 that was in the elementary budget, because the elementary has one custodian allocated, the middle school doesn't have any. So basically, they'll have one custodian for 568 students. So as they get into the year, if that changes, that would impact how this would look. So we continued and looked at the different transportation manager. There's some of the positions that we didn't know. We used the bus drivers, I think $15 for 900 hours, and tried to use maybe some similar numbers. So it's our best guess estimates. It's certainly not a pure statement. So we looked at the proposed budget and we said, okay, what would this look like? If we took the personnel expenses, we think they're short of over $221,000 if they do the proportionate share in sharing with the elementary school. We did learn, Matter Academy assessment charges $150 for every student. They have to pay it to the organization. It's for shared corporate costs and accreditation costs. So we did learn at the capacity interview that that was not included in the budget, so it was $150 times 154 students. So possibly there could be almost $250,000, $244,000 plus that was not included in that budget. So I said, okay, what could maybe they recoup from the grant? What are some monies that we could find to offset that? And so these are just some of the examples that come out to.
If I may, I just have a question for clarification. Sure. I'm sorry. Why are you operating under the assumption it would be a commensurate share? If those positions are fully funded under the current structure and it's a co-located school, why are we assuming that they must cover a proportionate share of those positions?
During the capacity interview, we asked how that would be covered because they have not allocated any expenses for any of those positions. And so they told
Correct.
us that they would be charged out as a proportional share.
So that was their response. Thank you. Okay.
Is that correct? Yes,
I
okay, I
missed
want to
that.
make
Thank
sure,
you.
yes.
Okay.
And then that, but I think, Ms. Amato, you might want to jump in for me. When we ask, would we be able to see that proportionate share now in the proposed budget? And the answer was, we would not see it at this point.
It raises the question, if those positions are fully funded now, and they're simply going to be tasked with taking on additional students, I don't even know why they recommended a proportionate share. They've already funded the position. There's no additional cost to them for those positions that are currently already in place.
The positions were funded at the elementary school. And so when you look at their financial audits for all of their matter schools that co-locate, they do proportionally share their lunch expenses, their staff expenses, all of those kind of things. And that's how they keep their money separate, so there's no commingling, so that you can make sure that when you do your financial audit, that it's, okay, that's how they present.
So they maintain separate books for a co-located school
Yes,
with one MSID number?
2,
They do issue 2 MSID.
yes.
Thank you.
So the elementary will have an MSID number, very good question, thank you, sir. And the middle school will have an MSID number.
Thank you.
And I apologize if I wasn't very clear there.
No, I may have missed it. I have a cold.
So there are some things that perhaps that we could recoup some of that money back, and so we looked at that. We took the reserve, the 3% reserve, and we also took the carry forward. So when you take the carry forward and reserve, you just have to know that next year that's going to impact those budgets going forward. So we tried to find money back to see if they would be okay. So when we looked at possibly expenses not covered, we, again, about $244,574. Possible revenue that we could find, $182,166. The difference would be a $62,408 deficit. That was not covered in their budget. So we were concerned about that. And if that was a standard application alone, we would say, okay, probably would not want to recommend approval of this application. But we cannot deny the fact that they have already received $1.5 million in grant funding. And so that $1.5 million in grant funding will cover any of these deficits or concerns that we are addressing at this time.
Ms. May.
Yes?
Question. Earlier, you said it was $58 million from a federal replication grant to open charter schools. Is that for their umbrella organization? And then the $1.5 million is for Mater?
That's our understanding, yes. That's what they explained to us at the, it's about a $58 million grant for the umbrella.
Umbrella.
For all the schools they're going to open.
Yes.
And then we asked this, or Ms. Amato asked the question, how much would this school receive? And they told us $1.5 million.
Oh, this, okay.
Mrs. Sanchez presented last work session. That was the amount that it's an estimated amount that the school would receive.
Okay, so do we have verification of that?
I have reviewed the grant.
Okay.
I've reviewed the grant.
Okay.
It has been awarded and.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. So here's where we are, basically. When we go back, so we said, okay, we've got a problem with the budget. So we went back and said, okay, let's look at the high-performing charter statute again. And the proposed charter schools education program and financial management practices do not materially comply. Well, we know that the curriculum section is one of the better curriculum sections that we've seen. And so the word "and," when I addressed Mr. Bridges, we have not come across that issue before, but the statute clearly says it must be the curriculum and the finances that do not materially comply. And so we had to keep that in mind as well. The other thing that is new this year that I think that we need to bring to your attention is that a prevailing party may file an action with the Division of Administrative Hearings to recover reasonable attorney fees and costs incurred during the denial of an application and appeals. So at this point, the charter application statutes say that if you deny, they appeal, the charter applicant wins, then it might be possible that you would have to pay for prevailing cost. And that's not something that we've had to think about before as a charter review team. And also, if you fail to uphold affirm the decision by the Court of Appeal, they can also withhold administrative fees from the school. That's something else that's new this year, too, that you might want to explore. Bottom line, so we looked at it all, okay? We said, okay, what do we do here? The merit of the charter application. We know we had some issues. There's no doubt about that. I think all three of these factors came into play in the recommendation. The high-performing charter statutes we could not ignore, and the prevailing party recovering fees and costs. That one we have not had to look at before, but we certainly thought about it. So we thought, well, okay, the budget. The budget was a main concern, but the budget, we know we have $1.5 million coming to the school, so that should take care of any budget issues that we may have. We know the ESE concerns are still real, but we do know that under operation in the state of Florida, they would have to provide a free and appropriate education. The district can control that to make sure that they are providing those students with the services needed or those that they said that they would receive. And then we also know that many of these concerns, as I can tell you, I've learned in the last 20 years, and Mr. Bridges can probably say, if you do go to appeal, they'll say many of these things can be taken care of under contract. And so when we took all these things into consideration, the review team's recommendation is to approve 14 and deny 3. So that is the recommendation by the charter review team. And I apologize I went quickly, but I'm sure you have some questions.
Did I miss the FTE calculation that would have shown how much revenue they would generate based off their anticipated enrollment? And why wasn't that used to offset the budget concerns? The budget is a concern for me, and I want to make sure I understand it completely.
When I went back and tried to pull out anything that we thought that the grant would cover and would offset the expenses, because the other expenses in the FTE we thought would be used for operating the school. And so we felt that we could not pull them out as something that could help support the budget. I know
Is that standard? Is that how we apply that to all charters, or is that?
We've never had a situation in the 8 years that I've been working with Polk County where we've had a co-located school that have shared expenses like this particular school.
Because based off their anticipated enrollment, they should generate almost $1.2 million in FTE, all included, $7,500 per pupil at 154 students. So if they hired 7 teachers based off the cost that I saw in the summary of roughly $47,000 per teacher, and I think they said they would hire 7 teachers, that came to $332,500. And then the admin expenses that we had concerns with that needed to be offset were $244, which would bring the total to $577 that they could easily cover from their FTE allocation. So I want to make sure I'm understanding the concern when it comes to the budget so that I don't misspeak in support or against a charter application.
And absolutely correct that those costs could be covered in the budget. It's all the other expenses of a normal school that you would anticipate. It will grow into a 6-8, but they are sharing costs with the elementary school, and so we were trying to show those costs were not going to be able to be supported by the FTE that was generated.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
Sorry, Doctor, I'm sorry, I looked back down. Dr. Allen and then Ms. Miller.
I'm sorry, I didn't know to recognize someone there.
Dr. Allen.
Great, thank you, Superintendent. I was curious, you mentioned the other schools underneath their umbrella. Did you happen to look at, and how many did you look at in regards to their fund balance? For example, I think 21 elementary schools, 18 middle schools, and 8 high schools. So did you look at that collectively? At all of those, or did you pinpoint a couple that were in deficit, or just curious to give some context around that? And then secondly, do you typically see a school work in a deficit within the first year?
Well, it's our hope that they're able to sustain the first year of operation. We know statistically that the budget is the biggest concern for new opening charter schools. Looking at I looked at every one of their financial audits for all of the Matter schools. And so there was only a few schools that are operating. I don't want to misquote here. I think there's one or two schools that are operating in the negative, but most of them are in very good position financially.
Okay.
And
the
they
one or
reported
two,
them. Sorry?
Gotcha. So the one or two that you mentioned that are operating in a deficit, what year are they in operation, do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay. Curious too, your perspective on, because I think in the materials it says, so we know we have ESSER, mental health dollars, IDEA funds, and all those other things. So we present a budget, and we want it to work without that. And we also know that we have the replication grant. So this is quote from the materials that we were looking at. Is it typical that you would prefer not to include federal grants in the mix of the overall budget?
Generally speaking, the district wants to look at revenue that is guaranteed. And so a lot of times grants are competitive, the startup grants are competitive, so they don't generally use those. But this is, this particular grant is guaranteed income. And that's why we felt comfortable being able to utilize that in our evaluation, because at $1.5 million, not many new schools have that opportunity. There, as you read the grant, there's basketball courts, STEM labs, there's all kinds of things that can be purchased with this particular grant that will certainly enhance the school environment. But generally, when we're looking at a budget, and the only reason we also looked at the budget to see if it could sustain on its own is because that's what they told us that they wanted the budget to do during the capacity interview. They said, we want to be able to prove that we can be sustainable on the generated FTE dollars. And they can for their 8 employees, but when you look at all the other services, and they do tell us they're going to share those services, and there would be prorated costs for those services, there's not enough FTE generated monies to do that in our evaluation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Miller?
I just have a question. I want to preface this with we understand what legislation has before us and high-performing charters can be renewed. But was there any explanation of, you mentioned students with disabilities, what they were funding, and what they described they would be able to serve? Was there an explanation on how they're going to make up the cost of that? How are you going to provide services for students with autism? How are you going to provide related supports if you're not budgeting for that?
The only thing that I recall, it was on page 42 when it listed those students, but the application narrative itself does not address that. When we did ask, they said they would provide all those services, but we did not get into detail during the capacity interview as far as funding, how they are going to fund those things. It was our opinion that it would be very difficult, based on the revenue and the personnel that they presented, to be able to fund the services that they listed. Now, if they're going to do an inclusion model, we haven't really had discussion with them with that. We only know that because Ms. Chris was able to share that because she's been working with the elementary school. So there were no, I do not think there was anything budgeted for those services.
And I think I did mention, I requested it when they were here with us, that they make that known to parents, because you can describe that you provide those services and those children will enroll, and then the child's needs might be higher than what they can afford to meet. But before we do that and then go through the cycle of sending them back to a typical school that has services like that, I hope that we are making that well known at the beginning, because with well intentions, if you don't have the funding for it, then it's not going to be something that you can do. It's unfortunate that we keep seeing FCAT Science 2.0, FCAT anything. I taught elementary school when the FCAT was given. We haven't given the FCAT in a long time, and I'm hoping that even though high-performing charters are pretty much automatically renewed, there's not much local say in it, that we can at least update applications to represent what we currently service and provide here, which is not the FCAT. Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
Thank you. I agree with Ms. Miller. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the areas of concern were not addressed because of the fact that at the end of the day, for the most part, we know that we are in a situation where we pretty much are up against the wall and have to approve the application. I wanted clarity on the 1.5 replication grant. That is a one-time grant. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It is my understanding that it is a one-time grant. I don't know the longevity of the grant, do you? I don't know. I don't know how long it is, but it is a one-time grant. I do have the grant with, parts of the grant with me. Let me see if I can see.
And I guess while you're looking, my point is, because of the overarching support that they have with their fund balance, and if they were to have a challenge, it appears to me that they would have the support from the higher corporation to offset whatever deficit they might have, from what I'm looking at. I was looking at the article that was in yesterday's paper here locally about an audit finding for us. And I was trying to see where it talked about the charter school that was involved with some of the deficiencies, and that was a $360,000 amount. So my question is if we approve this charter school, and if there's some issues with any area, ESE or whatever else it might be in an audit finding, it's going to, this is a question probably for Superintendent Hyde, it would end up being under our umbrella because of us actually approving the charter schools in our school district. Do you understand my question?
Yes, ma'am. So what you're saying is if they default somehow, does that become our financial responsibility?
Yes.
Mr. Bridges, again, it's been a minute. I don't recall that we would assume that would default back to their parent company.
I do not believe that is the case under the statute.
Correct.
The school district is not liable on the debts of the charter school. I will mention that several years ago, the school board denied an application which on its face appeared to not have a budget that would work. But it was an application that had been put forward by an organization that had several schools, and while their application didn't talk about sharing funds or commingling funds, while we were up on the appeal, the State Board of Education found that so long as the parent organization had funds that indicated that they were willing to share, that they saw nothing wrong with that. So I think it's likely that if, although this application on its face has budget weaknesses, I think the committee, and certainly Ms. Amato and Ms. Mace, in reviewing this, took into consideration from whom the application came and the financial status of the parent organization and their other schools.
Thank you.
And Ms. Fields, I believe the grant, at least they showed the budget for a 5-year breakdown for that, the US DOE replication grant.
So for 5 years?
5-year breakdown. So I don't know how long the grant is, but the grant is, their budget includes a 5-year breakdown. And
Wow.
it does list the schools that it will be opening within the grant, and there's several of them.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. Thank you.
Great presentation as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's very helpful.
Up next is Ms. Heather Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, as you recall, during our most recent board meeting, provided, along with Mr. Pitts, our Chief of Staff, an update on the district budget, anticipated budget moving forward. At that time, there was a lot of conversation and interest regarding the Family Empowerment Scholarship because we were projecting a significant increase in what we were budgeting for that. And so I requested of staff that we bring back this topic specifically to provide further clarification and address any other questions that you may have specific to this and/or how we arrived at our increased cost calculation. So Ms. Jenkins is here with you today, and she'll take us through a short presentation and address any questions the board may have.
Good afternoon. As Mr. Hyde said, we'll be talking about the Family Empowerment Scholarship. hopefully, oh, it's right there. Here's our presentation. On May 11th, 2021, Governor DeSantis signed in House Bill 7045, which resulted in a lot of changes to the Family Empowerment Scholarship. It explained that it would now include 2 branches of eligibility for educational options, which they refer to as FESEO, and the Family Empowerment Scholarship for Students with Unique Abilities, which is the FESUA. Eligibility is based on family income and provides the option for K-12 students to attend a participating private school. Families apply through one of the approved scholarship funding organizations. There are 2 of those. They're located on our district website. We have 104 private schools in Polk County. Currently, Polk has 3,972 students attending 161 private schools. So what that does mean is you can utilize the scholarship to go to a school in a different district. The Family Empowerment Scholarship also offers families of eligible students the option to receive a $750 scholarship to provide transportation, and that can be used for a public school if they choose that option. I'll go into all of this in a little bit more detail as we move through the presentation. Effective July 1st of 2022, this year, the Mckay Scholarship Program joined the Family Empowerment Program under the Unique Abilities category. That's designed to offer families with students with disabilities as young as 3 years of age access to additional educational opportunities. Families may choose to enroll their student in another choice public school. Charters are typically not an option for this. They're not considered choice. Or they may receive a personal education savings account. So it's similar to a health savings account, flexible savings account. You have a card that can actually be used for expenses. They receive a deposit of public funds. It can cover things such as private school tuition and fees, online learning programs, community college costs, higher education expenses, and yes, ma'am.
I just want to interrupt just for a second. First of all, it's not a card that they're given. They're given an expense account where they have to either do reimbursement or find someone that will self-bill into that account. A lot of these are reimbursement. Some of these private schools do not bill themselves. So that's been an issue with some of our students. I just didn't want people to think that those are some kind of debit card. It's not. It's you have an account. It's online with one of these nonprofits, but you have to submit receipts for services and or tuition to only private schools. Any public funded school does not count. But I was going to ask your number. You kept mentioning private schools. Does this account the students on empowerment scholarships that are homeschooled?
That it includes the homeschools, and I have the breakdown further on.
Okay.
Yes. And the number of the private schools comes from the DOE Choice website. They have a listing by county. And then we also have a listing that comes out of Focus that lets us know where the students are enrolled. Families have to apply annually for renew and participation in the FESUA through one of the approved scholarship funding organizations, which are responsible for determining the eligibility. House Bill 7045 stipulated that students transitioning from the Family Empowerment Scholarship UA from Mckay, that their scholarship amount will not be less than what their Mckay amount was this year. Siblings of a participating FESUA student are eligible for a scholarship to attend a private school under the Educational Options branch of the Family Empowerment Scholarship, regardless of the income level. Information on those siblings, the parents have to submit that during the selection process.
Ms. Fortney?
So, Ms. Jenkins, basically, we're just a pass-through.
Yes, ma'am.
That's it.
We're getting to the funding. I wanted to give you a little bit of history, and thank you, Ms. Miller, for clarifying that one piece for us. The scholarships for students determined eligible in the beginning were established for 18,000 students. That was in 1920. Beginning in the 2021 school year, the maximum number of students participating shall annually increase by 1% of the state's total public student enrollment, which is about 7,500 kids.
75,000 or 7,500?
75,000, thank you. Sorry, I got choked. There you go. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Fortney?
Back to the pass-through, how much time or money do you think you and your office has spent just to do this? I'm just curious.
This, about 8 hours.
80?
8
total? Thanks
Thus-
to computers?
thus far.
Thus far.
Okay.
Like over the context of, like how long? Are you speaking? I'm not understanding your question, Ms. Fortney, sorry.
I just want to know
Yeah.
how much time and money we have to invest as a pass-through.
Typically, once we get into the process, DOE withholds these funds from our allocation.
Okay.
So the time spent has been, we spend it in analyzing how that impacts our funding.
Gotcha. That was it. Thank you.
Ms. Miller?
We also have staff that have to, we have staff, whether it's homeschool staff or the people that used to run the Mckay, I don't know what we call them now. They have to take calls and verify students' enrollment before it goes to DOE. There's a cross-check that they do with DOE, but a lot of the times the matrices are not correct or the parents feel that I'm talking for the ESC side. Now, there's a completely different side. Students with disabilities that were originally with the Gardner, income did not matter. I don't know if we said that. But those students probably need more support at the sites level or the district level because we have to do an IEP even if we've never seen these kids. So there's staff involvement for creating IEPs and there's staff involvement for cross-checking matrix numbers before it goes to the state. So I don't know finance office probably, but we do have a commitment to this that I don't know we are reimbursed for staff time. It's part of what we do. It's what we do.
We also have an FTE analyst who's solely responsible for Mckay and the family empowerment piece. The next couple of slides are statute that talk about how the scholarship is calculated. I wanted to include in case you wanted further detail. But I want to go into I did a couple spreadsheets, which I think make it easier than reading that for you, but it is here if you'd like to refer back. Our FTE, which was prepared by our analyst, for the third calculation, somehow it's not showing back. Our 21-22 FTE third calculation amounts for the scholarship is broken down by K through 3, 4 through 8, 9 through 12, ESE, basic, and it gives the number of students. We had actually 3,972 kids in the Family Empowerment Scholarship this year. So our total POC unweighted FTE is 112,267. The FES recipients are about 4% of our current FTE. That FTE includes charter schools, virtual school, our public schools, family empowerment, DJJ. For 22-23, we're projecting 3,916 family empowerment scholarship recipients, which will be about 5%. I'm sorry, I read y'all the wrong number. 5,887 is what we're projecting out of 116,000. So that's 5% of that allocation. We're looking at growth of 3,916 in our total population and growth of about 1,900 in the scholarship estimate amount. For reference, Broward County has currently 9,398 scholarship recipients. Dade has 17,200. Duval has almost 6,000. Hillsborough has almost 6,000 as well, and Orange has about 8,300. So it's not just Polk County, it's statewide where we're seeing an increase in these scholarship amounts.
Ms. Jenkins, can you explain a little bit about, because I still need this, and I don't know if Wendy, because it's the recent legislation, can you talk about how the funding mechanism of this has changed? It wasn't always funded this way. It was originally funded as a tax credit for businesses, and it created a whole nother pot of money. So can you, I would
Yes,
like to
ma'am.
see how it affected us when they changed to funding it now using these dollars.
Yes, ma'am, and I will apologize. I have an updated version. I was still getting information, so I'll move forward with that. You all should have a copy of that. So funding-wise, they are funded the same way as we are as a school district. You're funded per FTE, and there's something called a Florida Financial Funding Formula, which goes through how we distribute state dollars. So it starts with the FTE of students multiplied by something called a program cost factor. So depending on what type of student we have, whether it's a kindergarten student, if it's an ESE student, if we have an ESOL student, every student has a different weight, every group of students. So you multiply your FTE by that program cost factor, and that gives you your weighted FTE for your students. And then we take our weighted FTE times the base student allocation, which is the same for all of the state of Florida, times the district cost differential, which then gives you your base funding. Now, once you have your base funding, we take into account, we add in the categorical pieces, which are DJJ, sparsity supplement, state-funded discretionary, every piece of that. The only thing that the Family Empowerment Scholarship recipients do not receive is the transportation allocation, because they've set aside that extra $750. So their funding is calculated exactly the same way ours is, based on the conference report. We get 5 calculations each year. The conference is the first, which is what we presented last time. We have the second calculation in July. So they set their scholarship rates per the conference report. And those range based on the type of scholarship that they have. So for example, kindergarten through 3rd grade for Polk, for the basic scholarship amount, can receive they receive $9,400. This is the ESE matrix basic scholarship amount, $9,493. 4 through 8 receives $8,959. 9 through 12 receives $9,002. A level 254 receives $18,020, and a level 255 receives $25,184. Those are the current rates for this year, for school year 21-22. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question on those rates. The 255 matrix, the student is allocated the 25. The savings account you're talking about doesn't receive the 25. There's a percentage that's taken there. Is any of that go to the district, or does that all service through the nonprofit, so it's benefiting the nonprofit for their services?
It's my understanding that goes through the nonprofit. The way that it works for the district is based on the funding formula and the calculation, as we move through the year and our number of students go up and down, that happens throughout the state. So we have something called a proration. If every district in the state of Florida's number of students go up, there's one specific pot of money that is used for our FEFP allocation. So DOE will prorate the amount. These scholarship amounts, the maximum amount remains steady based on the conference report. But as you said, yes, they have to go through a process. That process is outside of the district.
I have one other question on funding. If this same amount of students from Polk County were using these scholarships before it was funded through FEFP, would we see a cost difference? I'm trying to find out when they dipped into the district, when it was just a nonprofit that collected money for a tax exempt for businesses, did it affect our budget the same as it would be when they're using FEFP? And can we tell the difference in those two?
Yes, it's, Gardner used to be outside of the district, so that was a completely separate process.
Right.
It was, and yes, family empowerment was the same way, it was similar. We always saw the Mckay dollars because, Mckay, we were a pass-through for Mckay, and we did have the opportunity for students to Mckay from one school to the other. With the Family Empowerment Scholarship, the families can still elect to have students go from one of our schools to another if they're in the UA unit. But what happens is that FTE isn't counted, so it shows up as district FTE rather than part of the FTE we see for the family empowerment. So when I was researching those numbers, if they choose to stay within our school, they are shown in our FTE, and the only portion of the allocation that is outside of the district would be the transportation piece, if they choose that.
They have to apply for the transportation piece separately, is what I understand?
Yes, ma'am.
That helps, but it would be nice to have numbers. If 5,000 students were in it 2 years ago and what it looks like to 5,000 students today, because a lot of this, and I'm glad that there were some changes made to grandfather in some of that Mckay, but it's going to be reduced after the grandfathering period. We're not going to, because if you did, this is all foreign to most people, but if you did a straight Mckay, you would not receive the $9,000 limit. If you were the lowest matrix, it would be a lot less. So they were getting like $4,000 more just to go to the empowerment scholarship. There were changes made, if I understand, that that's only a grant, they're only going to grandfather those in for the rest of this year. So it will change. And I don't know if that'll change what we get. So that's another question. But this is sold as dollars following the student. So this shouldn't, if you're talking to advocacy groups or in Tallahassee about this, the impact doesn't sound as it does here because these dollars are following the child out. So it would be nice to see how it affects multiple categories for us. And it's not just that, it doesn't sound like the dollar is just attached to the child. It looks like we're losing money from other areas as well. But it's hard to see that in explanation.
Essentially, we're losing, you could say that we're losing 6,000 students or 6,000 FTE, and the dollars that we're losing would be the funding that we would keep if those students were remaining here.
I have one other question, and we can answer these other ones privately because it's too much for people who don't live inside the world of this. But you said these students are in focus. Do we track how many students come back off of these scholarships?
Mm-hmm. We do.
Do we have an average of that?
Yes. We have, actually none have come, from what we can tell, none have returned recently. And you did ask for a breakdown, I have that for you. We have 979 in Gardner, which is included in the current number for family empowerment scholarships. We have 1,087 Mckay students. So if we look back, we can see that we think there'll be 1,900 more FES. So 1,000 of those can be attributed to those students that are currently in Mckay. Homeschool students that are currently on FES, there are 307. Of those 307, 55 are pre-K students that are on the Family Empowerment Scholarship. And those that were new to FES in 21-22 this year, 3,062 are new to the scholarship.
Does that include siblings?
Yes. And 298 of those were homeschool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Homeschool is a little interesting too because they are enrolled in the FES and they're also enrolled in homeschool as well. Their FTE is counted as a line item in the Family Empowerment Scholarship, so it is part of that number. We also have a breakdown per grade that you all wanted to see. So we have pre-K, there's 55 students, 434 in kindergarten, 149 in first. It's pretty standard, around 150 till we get to fourth, there's 208. 235 in 5th, and then it starts to increase again. We have 300 in 6th, 312 in 7th, 335 in 8th, and then 300 up through 10th, and then in 11th we have 428, and seniors we have 553. So it's higher for kindergarten, then it kind of goes down a little in the middle and then rises back up at the end. So based on the payment schedule that I was sharing with you all, I plugged that back in with the FTE and came up with 49,532 is our current estimate. This does include potentially 2.7 million for the transportation allocation. There is a caveat. I used this year's rates. I do know that those will be higher once they set them on the conference report amount because our base student allocation has gone up.
Ms. Fields.
So my question is, when we had this presented last board meeting, work session, thank you for going back, Superintendent Hyde, to bring to us more in-depth knowledge. My question is, the $750 transportation allocation for the students, is that budgeted in our overall budget? I don't remember that from last time, and I don't have that in front of me.
No, ma'am, that's something that we would be made aware of as it is approved. It's not budgeted, but the maximum impact would be 2.7 million. So within that number I gave you last time, the almost 49 million, it was included in as an estimate in that piece. But we won't, I would assume not every student that is eligible would take that.
I think if I may have misunderstood, or I may have understood Ms. Fields' question to be asked differently. Is that $750 per pupil currently budgeted? Does that impact our budget, or is that a direct draw from the state through another budget? So when you calculate $2.7 million as a cost for these students, if they all chose, or if those students chose to take advantage of the transportation allocation, does that come out of our transportation budget line item, or is that something that's billed directly to the state through a different funding source?
That's correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
No, it doesn't. I don't believe it does. Originally, I understood that it is part of the scholarship amount, but we are funded based on the FTE. So no, I would say no. That's not, I was not able to get complete clarification on that piece.
If you can get that for me, please, I would appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
And the other question that I had, the numbers that you gave for the different levels, for the kids that are not a part of our school district right now, is there a list by school of where those kids are going and the number?
Yes, ma'am, I can send that to you.
That would be interesting to see that, to see where the kids are going.
So based off the board's questions, there'll be three things I'll follow up with. Number one will be the updated slide deck that Ms. Jenkins referenced. Number two will be the breakdown. That it'll be included in our students. We'll answer the question of transportation costs and where that budget comes from, and then we'll provide the breakdown by school site.
Thank you. Dr.
Allen?
Yeah, and I think that's just a follow-up in regards to the general conversation. So the Florida Empowerment, the funding mechanism is a separate pot, right? So when we look at the corporate income tax, the excise tax on liquor, gas, oil production tax, insurance premium tax, that's being collected in a separate pot that's then being distributed in right in a nonprofit way towards students.
Changed.
That did change.
It
Correct.
changed. It's now included as part of the FEFP, Florida Education Finance Program. So they actually include the FTE in the district calculations. They have the separate scholarship amounts that they set. The families have to apply for the scholarship, go through that whole process through the two organizations.
Yep.
Once they are approved, the account is set up. The district continues to report the FTE. Whenever we are paid, that FTE is removed from the amount that we're paid. So
And at this point, I'm gonna invite Ms. Dodge to come to the microphone as well, because there was a lot of work that had to take place because this was not being adequately funded this year. And we've gotten some assurances that it'll be addressed through the recalc later this year. But I want to invite Ms. Dodge because she can speak to the fact that there seems to be some uncertainty as to future years where this funding will be derived from. So, Ms. Dodge.
Right.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Am I on?
You're on.
All right. It's nice to see everybody. I haven't seen y'all in a while, so thank you. So what happened this year was the legislature set aside about $464 million pot of money as a student reserve. And that was because they knew this was the first year we were funding scholarship students out of the FEFP, and that it was unclear how many, they thought they knew how many students were going to come on board, but they weren't, based on caps and those types of things that were placed in legislation, but they weren't entirely sure. And so in January, they kind of got an estimate of those numbers, and in the third calculation this year, they began including those numbers in our third calc that we received from the state. Unfortunately, there was a miscommunication, is how I'm going to characterize it. And so the district was only allocated base student funding for the scholarship students, but they're supposed to, their calculation for how much they receive for their scholarship is not only base student funding, but categoricals. And so there was a little kerfuffle, I'm gonna go with, and we have been assured by House, Senate, state staff that will be corrected in the fourth calculation. So right now we're operating in a situation where we didn't receive as much money as was credited for the scholarship students, but that will be corrected in any moment now when the fourth calculation comes out. Does that clarify?
And Ms. Dodge, if you would, I know if you can clarify, what does this mean for future years? Are we anticipating a similar process or a different process, or is that unknown still?
So this is the only year where a student reserve allocation, where there was funding set aside to cover all that. And as I said, when the FDOE only gave us base student allocation, they only used a small portion of that 464 million, like 190 million of it. And so the rest will transfer over during the fourth calc when they correct that. The biggest concern for future years is that this year the legislature greatly increased our teacher salary allocation from 550 million to $800 million. That money is money we're required to put on our teacher salary schedules, but it is also calculated in how much a scholarship student shall receive. So while it's a little bit of a conundrum. We have to put it on the teacher salary schedule, but the scholarship student also receives an amount equal to their prorated share of that, and that will be deducted from the school district. So it's almost as if the state is spending that money twice. And so it's a little bit of a concern for future years because there's no longer any pot of money to help protect the school districts from deductions such as this. And so it's something we're going to have to get worked out.
Thank you, Ms. Dodge.
Don't leave.
Oh,
Don't leave, Ms.
Ms. Fortney.
And now I'm going to bring up the three letters, FRS. How is all this tied into FRS and what we owe back to the state?
So FRS, to my knowledge, is not impacted by the scholarship students. Like
Okay.
the rates that we pay are set in statute, and they're not any part of a scholarship student's calculation.
I didn't want another conundrum.
Well, there'll always be another conundrum. Ms. Miller, I wasn't sure, or Dr. Allen, if there was.
Well, this is very difficult for people to understand with the different pots of money. And what Mr. Allen explained is how it worked for as long as we had that scholarship before they were all combined into one. I guess my question is it costing us more money now that they're using the new funding mechanism than it was before? Even if it didn't grow, is it going to cost us more money using it the current way they're doing it, and not through just the tax benefit pot of money?
I'm not sure who you mean by us, but it's
Like the
certainly.
district.
Okay.
Me, personally, how much is it costing? Just kidding.
Well, I mean, it is now publicly funded, where before it was funded through corporate tax credits. So it's costing somebody more money. But in terms of what the school, we are currently not receiving the same amount of money that is being deducted from us for a scholarship student. So in that vein, it is costing us some money. And I believe that Ms. Jenkins has put that on her slide. You can kind of see where that is.
Ms. Miller, I'd like to add, I think it's more the perception. So whenever you see the amount that the FEFP has increased, it shows $74 million, which seems like a large amount of money. But then once you start breaking it down and you look at where different what those pots are and where those dollars have to go, it's more of a perception, because those students are no longer here. And even though they're included in what you see as our funding, it will eventually be taken off the top. So it's more to try and clarify, to help everyone understand that will go away.
Okay. And Ms. Dodge, I had one more question. Is there a discussion, if you use these scholarships, you realize, especially from the former Gardner side, how difficult they are for people who have to be reimbursed, and the computer system itself has failed multiple times. Reimbursements can take 90, 120 days. So if you can't find a school that's taking direct billing for you, you have to be someone who has resources to pay for things ahead of time. I've been told they are working to fix this, but have they said anything about trying to, and these nonprofits are making a lot of money. They're now, I know they're nonprofits, but that word is hard for me, because they are very profitable nonprofits. But the mechanisms they're using for the additional students that are being added are not working across the state. It's very public how difficult that is. Have they talked about trying to manage that system at all, or are we just going to keep adding to that?
I am scheduled to bring a legislative update to you at the May work session. So some of the end of session summaries that you received will be flushed out a little more at that time. But in the education conforming bill this year, they did put language in there that streamlines more how the scholarship students receive. They no longer have to be verified before they can start getting going on their scholarship by the department. They eventually will be verified, but they're not waiting anymore to verify the student has exited the school district before they start funding their scholarships. And then, if there's something comes down the line, they'll correct it at that time. But that was part of the issue, was that there was such a backlog. So many students came on this line. There was a backlog of the verification process throughout the state of Florida, not in any particular district. And so that was holding up students being funded in their account and then being able to get reimbursed for expenses that they'd already incurred since the beginning of the school year.
I mean, the system itself shuts down almost every day. So I'm hoping they invest. If they're going to take on these students, they're going to have to invest in infrastructure to maintain. I know as a district, we could not operate not being able to upload documents on a daily basis. So I'm hoping someone is looking at that as you're in Tallahassee in the halls. If we're going to do this and offer this to families, a lot of these families can't afford, $80 therapies to rack up for months before they get reimbursed. So they've got to figure out a system that will help, streamline those reimbursements.
And I will double check the language, but I believe they also changed for the scholarship funding organizations some of the allowable expenses for them so that they could update some systems and use some of their funding to do that. But I'll double check that and I'll send it to you.
Thanks.
Dr. Allen?
Yeah, and this is probably more so for Ms. Jenkins, going off of Ms. Fields, some of her inquiry. Maybe demographic information. I know we're speaking in numbers. Sometimes I'm trying to understand who the individuals are that would be taking the scholarship. You noted it in your first point that it's based on family income. My understanding is the threshold that, and a priority is actually going to probably the lowest income families within our community. And I would like to know if I can hold to that position or not by looking at some of the demographic information. I don't know if that's even accessible, but the priority does go to the lowest income family, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have the demographic info available, but I will check.
And the question is, I would like to know if it's reflective of the breakdown within our community. I looked at the general Florida data, and it does, I think, pretty much match the demographic breakdown of Polk County. But that's statewide, so I think what I'm curious about is the scholarships of the 5,000-something students. Does it reflect our demographic breakdown?
Ms. Jenkins, and to my colleague, Mr. Allen, the 2,000 students, the Mckay / Gardner, have no income requirements. So we would just be looking at, and the Hope scholarships have no income requirements. It's only one subset that has an income requirement.
Yes,
The standard, the EO.
Specifically the EO, yeah.
Thank you both. At this point, it's 1:57. I'm going to ask that we take a short break. We will come back at 2:10 promptly, please. That's 13 minutes. So we can get started. We have several topics still ahead of us, including a lengthy policy update. So thank you all very much. We will adjourn for about 13 minutes and come back at 2:10. Thank you. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if that's acceptable.
when you build a culture where we're always assessing what you know, I want to know, what do you know? I care about what you know.
Right.
Kids are starting to build a culture where they'll walk up to you, let me tell you what I know.
Yeah.
You know, and where did you learn that? Oh, I learned that in third period today. So they're able to recall because we're always questioning what they learned, but the core of that comes from common planning.
Working for Polk County Public Schools as a bus driver or bus attendant is just a small yet important part of what we do to serve our students. We want to thank all the unsung heroes of our driving force. Our dedicated trainers assist every day with educating new drivers and bus attendants, preparing them to be the best they can be. Trainers shine in assisting new hires to become safe and efficient drivers, and they teach bus attendants the essentials of their daily responsibilities. It's more than a job. Our CPR trainers and instructors teach life-saving skills, keeping everyone's certification up to date with continual training. Trainers help with CDL licensing, making sure candidates know the ins and outs of a bus, preparing them to take and pass the commercial driver's license test. Putting our students' safety first is always our top priority. The transportation team thanks everyone for their hard work and the dedication that they give to make sure the job is done. The training department would not be where we are today if it wasn't for the devotion of our trainers. If you are a dedicated, responsible, respectful, patient person with a positive attitude and a desire to help others succeed, then you are exactly who we are looking for in a trainer. Please contact the training department if you are interested in making a positive difference in someone's life.
The District 5 School-Related Employee of the Year from Rochelle's School of the Arts, Tiffany Berrien.
My motto is student first, athlete second, because I've been in their shoes before, and I know what it takes now that I'm older and mature. So I just try to instill in them that it's fun to be a kid. It's fun to go to school. It's fun to be around your family. The sports is just an extra tool. I just like to love on them, just be a good mentor and instill leadership, life lessons, something that they could take with them the rest of their life.
She instills grades first before the actual sport. She instills family before the kid. You know, she tries to get that mentality of like, it's not just about you, it's about your last name, not your first name. And I think that's really something that maybe they're not used to hearing. They're all about me, me, me. And she's like, no, step back. It's about your family, it's about your grades, and then it's about what you want to do and what you want to accomplish.
Coach Tiffany is a really great part of our school. She is a tremendous asset at our PE department, in our library, in our cafeteria. She just gets all over the campus and she helps us in so many places. She always does it with a smile on her face and she's always willing to help out. And if she has to step into a classroom to assist, she is welcomed by the kids and everybody's always so glad to see her.
She's just a good person overall, and she makes me feel good about myself. She makes me want to try harder, stuff like that. She really encourages me to do my best and do better at things. She's a really good person, and I love her personally. I really do. And she's a very important person to me.
I want them to remember me as she's tough, but it's out of love. They know behind the smiles when it's time to get serious. When I go coach mode, PE mode, I'm serious because I know what it takes. And just take that. It's out of love. And one day down the road, you will understand and you'll come back and say, because of Coach Tiffany, this is why.
So in the very beginning, I wouldn't necessarily start with sharing out like deep emotional things. We would
Yeah.
kind of be like, do you prefer chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? And like it would just be kind of getting comfortable with the routine of talking to your peers. But it definitely helps them chat with each other in a way that builds relationships. I think the kids get to see who is like them and who is not like them, but we're kind of building the ones that are not like you are still part of the class family. How can we get them involved? So they get to really interact with each other and see how they can build a bridge.
when you build a culture where we're always assessing what you know. I want to know, what do you know? I care about what you know.
Right.
Kids are starting to build a culture where they'll walk up to you, let me tell you what I know.
Yeah.
You know, and where did you learn that? Oh, I learned that in third period today. So they're able to recall because we're always questioning what they learned, but the core of that comes from common planning.
This event is really unique because it's a really special time for us to celebrate new teachers. We throw them this party to celebrate them actually making the decision to not only be a teacher, but to be a teacher here in Polk County Public Schools. We get all dressed up, we have a sparkling cider toast at the end, we're hearing from our superintendent, and it's just really a great time for teachers to network with each other and then get to experience some local restaurants as well.
I am incredibly excited about the fact that new teachers get an opportunity and just really feel like they're celebrated. I think oftentimes we get into the initial start of school and things are overwhelming and they don't really have that opportunity to say, hey, I'm here, I'm officially hired with Polk County Public Schools and I'm a part of the family. And so to be able to have that feeling and to be joined by a lot of different individuals in the district, it kind of really feels like the support is surrounding them physically and literally. So I'm really excited for them just to feel celebrated, supported, and valued before the start of the year.
What's really powerful about them getting to make these connections early on is that we know that teachers feel isolated, especially new teachers. So for them to get the opportunity not only to be able to meet other new teachers, but to be able to meet district staff that they are getting to put a face to a name, it really just makes it all come together for them and let them know you're not in here alone. We're here to support you and celebrate you.
Right there, just start the meeting, don't say it. That's it.
Welcome back. And Superintendent Hyde, I will turn it back over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for the break. At this time, I'd like to bring Wendy Dodge, Senior Director of Legislative Affairs and Policy, back up to the podium or the table where she will provide some policy updates.
Good afternoon again. Thank you for your patience with Wendy 2.0 this afternoon. So there are 4 policies that are being brought before you. They were all recommended by Neola. The first 2, one is a brand-new policy, Parents' Bill of Rights, and that is required by the legislation that was passed last year. And then the second one, 5780, Student and Parents' Rights, are updated based on the language in that bill and then subsequent FDOE rule changes. Construction contracting is a policy that we're several updates behind on, and Angela Usher and her staff were kind enough to help me to just update that to make sure that we were included some new statutory language that had been passed over the past few years, and that it matched our way of work that we do in Polk County. And the same is true with the school nutrition policy. There were several updates that we had missed, we hadn't gotten to. We were kind of haggling over language. And so that staff also helped me get that updated so that it's compliant with today's rules and statutes. And that one also has federal regulatory changes in it. So are there any questions about any of the language?
Ms. Fortney?
This actually has to do with school nutrition. This is not your lane, but it occurred to me that we have staff that, might benefit from free breakfast and lunch. Is there any kind of grant or program we can offer to feed our staff for free like we do our kids that anybody knows of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I would
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I would be happy to reach out and see if that's something we could explore, or if it's something that we could try to go for at the federal level.
Right. And then on 5780, there's a part there that I really love. Parents are responsible to ready their children for school. I like that part. And make sure everybody knows they can opt out of health education. All right, that was it.
Seeing no further questions. Oh, Dr. Allen?
Actually, yeah. So looking at, are there going to be more policies as it relates to HB 241? Or is that the extent of it?
No, there were 2 other policies, and they're safety related, and they're going to be coming to you hopefully at the next.
Awesome.
They're still being reviewed by staff.
Okay. In that policy 5780.01, I think it does a good job of defining a parent. There was some language in the original HB 241 that I don't know if there's an opportunity to include some of that language. But it's basically said the legislator finds that it is a fundamental right of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their minor children. I don't know, I saw value in that. The policy, it just says parent, this is who a parent is, and then it works through that list of items. But I don't know, just as a point of discussion, would recommend possibly that language like that in defining the role is important too.
Okay. When I bring that to you for final, we can certainly include that language in there.
Cool, thank you.
Seeing no further questions or discussion? Thank you, Ms. Dodge. So the next item up for the board is a presentation on Mclaughlin Middle School. This has been an ongoing topic of conversation upon my arrival. The board, as I shared with you, previously addressed and workshopped a discussion about Mclaughlin Middle School and its possible expansion to include high school. That occurred, if I recall correctly, in February of 2019. Upon performing some additional research, I could not find any additional reference to Mclaughlin's expansion or what may have ceased the conversation at that time. I'm assuming that that was largely related to COVID and other events that were taking place at the time. And so because I have continued to hear questions about the Mclaughlin from community stakeholders and from the school itself and from others, and given the fact that that community is growing, both Winter Haven and the Lake Wales area are slated for additional large numbers of additional residential units, it would behoove us to have a conversation about Mclaughlin Middle School and its potential of expanding its grade level. Again, as I shared in February 26th of 2019, there was a workshop related to this. I could not find any evidence of an actual vote or discussion, nor could I find any additional direction that was provided to the superintendent at the time and or the district as far as follow-up, and that's why I'm bringing the topic back up here today. There is a renewed interest, as I shared. The school and the school's leader, and one of the things I was told as a possible reason outside of COVID that the school did not move forward, or we did not move forward with this, was because of the school's current grade. The school at the time was a D and needed to exit DA before any additional conversations needed to take place as it related to potentially Mclaughlin growing and expanding its grade level. There is physical space because of the school's current enrollment. There is plenty of physical space there, but the school has really done an amazing job, and I should not say the school, but I really should give tremendous credit to Deborah and the principal out there, and she does an amazing job. Not only has she moved the school academically, she's created a culture within her school where those students really thrive, but additionally, she's created a network of supports within the community, and I see her sitting all the way in the back, like a good student would, all the way in the back of the room. But she's really established some strong rapport and relationships within her community. The school benefits because of her due diligence, and if you have not had the pleasure of interacting with Deborah, she is tenacious. That woman does not take no for an answer, and she always looks to find a yes within to address her problems and her concerns. And I think we saw that in the manner in which she provided wraparound services and supports for her international teachers, and the way she has truly embedded them within the school's culture. But of late, we're hearing more and more there's an interest of many of our community-based partners to invest in that campus, to see it continue to flourish, to see it continue to grow. For example, Duke Energy would love nothing more than to put a power academy on that campus, and there is adequate space, and we've had some conversations initially about what that might look like. What I like about the proposal from Duke is they're not just looking for traditional lines people. They are looking for sales, they're looking for customer support, they're looking for those types of roles, and they actually have an interest in creating an actual call center on the campus where students would be employed part-time, working directly with Duke certified adults to be in that industry. So there are multiple pathways within the power industry outside of just, I should not say just because it's an incredible field, beyond being a lines person. There are, as you know, opportunities in every industry to be involved in management, to be involved in customer service, to be involved in IT and network. So I was appreciative. I know Mr. Green and I went out and met with the team there and with Duke Energy to kind of hear a sense of their proposal. They've already committed $25,000 minimally to support the program, as well as providing the manpower to explore placing a call center on that campus to employ our students. And what a great opportunity for our students to get not only it's considered a paid internship, but also to get that experience and become a feeder into that industry. And so it's an exciting time, and Mclaughlin, again, under Ms. Hudson's direction, has done an incredible job. The benefits, again, as we talk about Mclaughlin, the school is only at 38 to 39% of its utilization. And so the school will have to either undergo or be part of the comprehensive rezoning, or we can continue to explore options for that school. They have space for an additional 735 students based off their current utilization, number of classroom spaces that they have readily available. So potential growth and expansion of the grade levels at that school is a viable option. Projected growth, as I shared, in Winter Haven and Lake Wales, you are all very much familiar. I know Ms. Cunningham's very familiar, as is Ms. Wyatt, and Mr. Wilson are very familiar with those communities and the growth that's taking place there. Not to say that everyone else is not, but I've had conversations with you individually about the growth and the needs that are going to happen there. As you know, Winter Haven's a very large high school, and so we're going to need some solutions before we find ourselves in a similar situation as we currently have at Ridge and or Haines City. So a viable option for this to address that growth and future needs is to allow the school to grow into a high school. Obviously, you've heard me say this. I am a huge proponent for continuity of program. Anytime we can remove a transition between school levels for students, the students benefit, the school benefits, the staff benefits, because those students become a known commodity. The relationships have been established, not only with students, but with their peer group and also with the families. And so, again, the longer a student can remain in an academic setting, the better off they are, and the better off we are in our ability to best serve them. As I shared, currently there's more than enough space and existing infrastructure to support academy options. It is a very large campus. They have agricultural facilities with a relatively new, if not a new greenhouse. There's plenty of open space. There's actually a preschool setting that shares their campus. I don't know how many of you may or may not be aware of that. It's a relatively new building, but that program was shuttered. It is, at this point, it is only serving to store furniture. That is where Duke would like to place the call center because it's in close proximity to the school, and it would be somewhat off-site and allow parking for adults and others, but it's an easy commute between the school and that smaller campus. Ms. Cunningham.
Yes, sir. To answer your question, 2019 seems like 100 years ago. Let me be so honest. So much has changed at Mclaughlin through the past 3 years. And my comment is we need to go for it. I think it's awesome. I think Ms. Hudson is doing everything in her power to take that school in the new direction. It's obvious with the changes that have been made on site. The community, as you've said, is very excited about what's being done at Mclaughlin. And sometimes it's just the right time to do things. So I would say we really don't need to look back. I think we need to look forward. And I 100% support this moving forward with the leadership changes, with the community, with the growth, for all the reasons you've given, the opportunity for a power academy with Duke Energy. I mean, sitting right there in Lake Wales. I think this would be a great enhancement to the greater Lake Wales area. So I support it, and kudos to Ms. Hudson for all that she's done.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney.
Yes, I'd like to reiterate that she has the right DNA. I know that, if you get my drift. I just know that while we have her as a dynamic leader and the community support, I would like to ask the board if we could not, we're not voting on this tonight, correct?
No, ma'am. I was seeking input from the board and clarification on what other information the board would want before I would make a formal recommendation. So that was the intent of today. There is no vote scheduled for this evening at this time.
Well, I would like to suggest that could we move it to the evening agenda and make a vote? We have had this plan for a while, and you know, I know she needs time. I mean, she is a miracle worker, but time would be valuable for her right about now at the end of school so she can plan and get her team together. Fellow board members?
Mr. Wilson?
I'm not ready to vote on that this evening, and I would not be in favor of that.
Ms. Fields?
Okay, so, Mr. Hart, you are correct. I think the delay came with COVID, and I think if COVID had not come, we probably would have pursued it further. I think that it is a no-brainer. We have charter schools coming before us almost every meeting wanting to expand from 6th to 8, going into 9th, 10th, 11th. So if we're approving their applications, why not do our own? I think it's way past due. The facility is beautiful, and it is a shame that it is empty in a lot of the areas. And the growth is there, and it needs to be addressed. I think that when Superintendent Byrd was sitting in your seat, that was a lot of discussion with the community, with the staff. I know that she personally went down and spoke to the staff, and they came up with the idea of what they wanted to see. And then Ms. Chipman was very instrumental working alongside with Dr. Hudson as well. So I think that they've done the work. The D has been elevated to a C, and who knows what this year will bring. So I am 100% in support of it. I don't think we need to do it tonight. I think that we need to allow citizens to come to the next meeting to have their comments before we vote on it. But I definitely think that we need to go forth with it.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
I have two things. First of all, I don't think anybody up here is not going to sing the praises of Dr. Hudson or her DNA. And I'm appreciative of what she's doing out there. I've been out there. I've seen what they've done in just agricultural and what they've added for those students. I have two questions. One, I do think we need to hear, like you were that Ms. Fields mentioned, from the community, because I don't remember this. It might have been before our time, some of us on the board, or it could have been right as we entered before COVID. But I do have a question about that building. That building was built with IDA funds. It was a transition unit before it was a pre-K unit. It is a phenomenal facility. I don't know that IDA works as Title I. I don't know if we have to continue to use it as what it was paid for. And I think we could easily do that in incorporating students with disabilities in that program if we have to. I just didn't know. I know Title I funds you must use whatever they're spent on for students, Title I students. So I just want to make sure that I didn't know if you knew the history of that. It was it was built with IDA funds. It was supposed to be a transition unit. I think it ended up with a transition class of 3 or 4, and they actually supported the pre-K unit that was put there. I'd hate to lose that component because we have such minimal, if no, transition in the east area of the county that's meaningful and engaging. And I think Duke Energy may bring that aspect. But I just wanted to make you aware that that building was built with IDA funds.
Thank you. And I can verify all of this with Ms. Usher. I was not anticipating the board preempting my conversation and wanting this, but here's what I would be more comfortable with. I would very much like to bring this topic back in May. It's very clear that the board has a legitimate and sincere interest in moving the topic forward, but I do feel ill-equipped to summarize costs and next steps. Any recommendation that would come from me for Mclaughlin would be adding, similar to what we're doing at Bellicita, we would add a grade level each year. I did include this slide based on my conversations with Dr. Hudson that she anticipates she will retain 70 to 80% of her enrollment, and I don't know why this slide was not updated, because it was. We submitted a new presentation yesterday because it's not supposed to be 4 columns of 50%. It was 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%. 50, 60, 70, 80. So Ms. Hudson is very confident that she could retain 70% of her 70% or more of her current 8th grade cohort, which would go a long way to benefit the school overall. Because of the structure of the school and its current capacity, the costs for adding staff will not be the same as if, because of the number of students that would be retained, the cost would be different because some staff could be shared so long as they have the appropriate certifications between the middle and the high school, because there may not be enough sections fully so you wouldn't have the same costs there. I'd like to bring some facilities recommendations as well. The campus, as I shared, has the appropriate current facilities. What they would request is a gymnasium to be commensurate with a high school and an auditorium. So those would be some fiscal enhancements that I would want to make, but I'd like to bring that information back to you with Ms. Usher at the next meeting, because again, I want you to hear all the details and we make an informed presentation and decision. And I know that you workshopped this previously, which is why I attached the very comprehensive plan that was submitted previously, and I read through it. And there's a very extensive file in my office that my predecessor left. Ms. Bird left me in a very good place. No one can ever say Ms. Bird did not leave me appropriate documentation of everything that was going on in Polk County prior to my arrival. But there's a very thick file that I was able to read through, and I read through the minutes, and I wanted to make sure I was addressing board members' questions. So I would feel better. I think it's a more appropriate timeline to allow staff and others to come forward, community members to come forward. One of the things I don't want to miss in this, and I know, Mr. Wilson, you had your hand up, I want to be very clear and explicit that this is not a competition issue. Because if you read through the presentation, one of the things I talked about, especially in the academies area, is does it not become an opportunity for Lake Wales Charter, and I will initiate this conversation with them now that they have a new superintendent, to have shared services. There are academy programs we can support that they currently cannot. Just as you've heard me say, zip code should not preclude a student from gaining access to a high-performing or an academy model program. Why not do a similar model where they could share the campus, but we would charge the FTE for it, similar to what Florida Virtual does. So a student can come over, attend. We can structure the schedule in a way that they could attend either AM or PM. This is not an uncommon practice in other areas, and they could benefit from having their students having access to the programs as well. But we would get reimbursed for that portion of the day in which students were participating and we're picking up the staff. So it's a good partnership moving forward in my mind. And I think it extends and it helps us regain some traction and some momentum in our relationship. But there were some academies that had been discussed in addition to the fine and performing arts. That is an area we need to enhance significantly, and it does provide a viable option on the east side of our school district as a potential feeder to Harrison. And I want to make sure I reiterate that. This is not to be in competition with Davenport or with others, but some of our students may not be able to afford private instruction, and more often than not, when they go and they audition for programs, that might be the component that's missing that precludes their participation and ultimate enrollment and inclusion at Harrison. So we can have both options. We can have it go through high school and others, but again, I think there's a lot of pluses to this, but I'd like to comprehensively bring a plan to you at the May meeting. So thank you, Ms. Fields, for supporting that as well. Ms. Miller, and then Ms. Cunningham, then Ms. Fields. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. We'll come back to you. You see, I didn't give that to you, sorry. I just don't, and I don't know that you've been here long enough to understand what you just said. We'll move mountains in this district. We've been trying to do this. I've been trying to do it as a community member. We've been trying to do this as a board for a very long time, and I think this is the right opportunity with Lake Wales undergoing some changes that we can work in collaboration with each other. I can tell you as of recently, and I think I've shared this with you and Mr. Green, there was a phenomenal opportunity brought to us that we've never done before, and so it wasn't given a lot of attention, and I think we've missed on a lot of those opportunities. And like you said, it's done in other areas. I wasn't sure of that, the relationship that we've had with Lake Wales when I got here as a community advocate, but I can tell you what you just said is light years away from what we were operating as. It's not recent administration, it's just been decades of that. And so I'm looking forward to those collaborations, and I think it will be well received in that area of the county. Thank you.
Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you. And I just want to applaud you once again for your vision and foresight in working with the Lake Wales community. We have needed this for many, many years. Number one, to offer any type of academies that kids can go to. Once again, it's about the kids, not about the zip code and not about my address. It's about a human being who has an opportunity for an experience that otherwise they may not be able to get. Secondly, anytime that we can work together as a community, we build the entire community, not one school or a second school. So I think your vision is spot on. Additionally, it makes no sense to have a facility in a community the size of ours that is underutilized. So if we can look to ways to be able to offer, you know, as you've said, to start with 9th and then move to 10th, however that rolls out, I think will be very welcomed. And I'm just really excited. I applaud you for that, and I know that I have met Dr. Rodolfich, the new superintendent for Lake Wales Charter, and he's a wonderful human being, and he truly has a heart for children, just like you. And I feel with, you know, you being our new superintendent and Mr. Rodolfich being the Lake Wales Charter, the two of you get together, you're going to, as Ms. Miller said, you're going to move mountains. And our community has really needed that for a long time. And don't forget, Frostproof is just right on, you know, Babson Park, Frostproof. There's a lot of greater Lake Wales area communities where those children can have opportunities. And I'm really excited for that because, once again, it's all about the kids, not about the boundaries. So thank you for your vision, and I too agree. I would not like to vote on it this evening. I really feel that the community needs to have an opportunity to come and speak before us. I would imagine it would be all positive, but they still need to come, tell us how they feel before we take that vote. So I would look forward to your presentation on finances, facilities, you know, what you're going to do with the black box, all those things for arts and an arts center, whatever you're thinking. And two, don't forget, Lake Wales is one of the few littler communities that has an arts center. So if you build a performing arts theater or whatever you just said there that could work together with the Lake Wales Arts Center, oh my goodness.
Yes, ma'am.
What a blessing. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say Dr. Hudson has, as I shared, tenacious is putting it mildly. She has had a vision for this as well and got a taste for it, and the team has really pushed for this, so it makes it easy, quite frankly. So thank you. Ms. Fields.
Mr. Wilson and then me?
We can go back to Mr. Wilson.
No, I'll
but
defer to Ms. Fields.
Okay,
That's
all right, thank you. I think the only thing that I would add is that when you bring the information back to us, if you can show us the cost, how we're going to fund it, and
Yes, ma'am.
make sure that it doesn't interfere with another project.
Absolutely. That would be my intention. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. I apologize because I'm not up to speed on this matter, but are we talking about mixing high school students with middle school students in the Mclaughlin building?
In our current campus, yes, sir.
It seems like a small building to do that. I remember a time when we moved freshmen, ninth graders out of the high schools because we had concerns about younger students and older students being, especially in smaller buildings. So I would have some concerns about that.
Yeah, we would mirror, again, I think we would approach it the same way we've approached Belicita. And we have some lessons learned from Frostproof and from Fort Meade as well, where the similar populations and similar structures occur. So in Belicita, what we did was we created a separate area for the middle schoolers, and we have a separate area for elementary schoolers. But there are still some common areas where they'll come in contact with each other. In the same regard, this can happen there. There are wings of the current building that could be utilized as the freshman ninth grade campus next year, and then we could add high school to certain areas of the school. And I think that's why, again, I did not anticipate the initial response from the board, so I need some time with Ms. Usher to bring those proposals back before the board. But it's a very legitimate concern, and it's one that's come up anytime we've talked about consolidating school levels. It was a concern. It was a very big concern at Belicita because of what took place at Citrus Ridge, that they weren't able to separate those students other than by floor. And so we're able to create those safe spaces, but with an understanding that we will intentionally bring students together. There are some great opportunities that we miss out on if we don't bring, for example, upper level juniors and seniors down into 6th and 7th grade classrooms to serve as mentors to those students in a formalized, structured manner. I think we can create those systems again, but we learn from the lessons of Frostproof and Fort Meade where we've been able to be successful in that regard. So, any other questions? Then I have my direction, and we will bring this item will be brought back to back at the upcoming meeting in May. But please feel free, if you have any other questions or comments or concerns, please, as always, contact me, and I'd be more than happy to address those and or to include those in the presentation. The next item, as you know, I wanted to provide you with an update. There'll be a final update on May 10th as well as to the status of the books that were currently under review. So there were 18 committee members for each committee. I provided you with a breakdown here. Just as a reminder, the committee structure mirrored the existing process that Polk County Public Schools has had in place and has relied upon for any number of years. It is primarily constructed of the school's media center staff, of English language arts teachers, reading teachers, and of parents. We went beyond that to be more inclusive, and I think it's important because when we start talking about community standards, we want to be inclusive of more people to ensure that that voice was there. Additionally, we included, as you recall, some experts in childhood development because we felt that that was necessary to have that voice be part of the conversation, because if the initial concern, as it was stated, was that somehow these books are unduly influencing or impacting our students, then we wanted to ensure that we had addressed that process formally. So we created our committees. The book review committee results are here. There are two different tables included in my summary. There's one based off the committee's recommendations and the committee's votes and findings, and then there's my recommendations, and I'll explain why in some areas they are different. The committees did an amazing job, quite frankly. The conversations, if you were not privy to those, I would encourage you, and I know many of you have watched the videos of those conversations. Very in-depth conversations, very good. Very professional, very collegial. They were able to discuss topics in great detail. I would tell you, I'm incredibly proud of the student representatives that we had. Their ability to bring their thoughts to the table, to capture where they believe the students are living on these issues. They were incredibly bright, and even several of the committee members commented recently on our students and said that they were very impressed by them. And I believe the comment was they were hopeful that they were representative of the majority of our students. So the committee results are here listed for you. I'm sorry, that's a little difficult for me to see. But the kite runner, for example, you can see there were 11 votes to retain it at middle and high school level, and then 4 votes to retain it at high school only. So recommendations, just for clarity, were based on where we saw the weighting of the votes, right? And that's where the committee's recommendations come from. So for example, that book, the recommendation was retain it at the Kite Runner for middle and high school libraries. Again, going on, the Vincent Boys, the recommendation was to retain the ability of the Vincent Boys at high school libraries only. Beloved, the recommendation was to retain availability of Beloved for high school libraries, and that was a vote of 15-1, with 15 recommending the high school only, 1 being to retain it at middle school. You do see there are some people who requested and voted to have the book removed in its entirety, but again, we looked at the totality of the votes and the feedback that we received, and then 13 reasons why the recommendation was to retain at middle and high school. The real life boyfriends, the recommendation was to retain real life boyfriends for middle and high school again. And tricks, the recommendation was to retain availability for high school only. Drama, the recommendation was to change the availability of drama from elementary, middle, and high to school libraries at middle and high school only. So there were some recommendations that came out of the committee to move books from one level to another based off their discussion. I think part of it too is based off the grade level recommendations of the publishers. For George, the recommendation was to change the availability from middle and high school libraries to elementary, middle, and high. So there was a change that broadened the recommendation there. 19 minutes, the recommendation was to change the availability from middle and high school to high school only. And it's perfectly normal. Was the recommendation was to move it, from high school libraries to include it at middle and high school together. So they expanded the inclusion there entirely loud and incredibly close. The recommendation was to change availability from high school libraries to middle and high school libraries. And then The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morrison, the recommendation was to change availability from middle and high school libraries to high school libraries. So the results, you see them summarized here. It probably would have been a lot better if I'd have forwarded to this slide. It would have been easier for me to see. You see the recommendations there. Again, we operated with 2 distinct committees. By and large, all books were retained, but there were some changes recommended by those committee members as to their placement. In some instances, you saw they asked to expand it into lower grade levels. In others, they moved it simply to higher grade levels. There were several titles still remaining at the time: Two Boys Kissing and Almost Perfect, and I Am Jazz. And these will be finalized by Thursday, May 5th. The last one, More Happy Than Not, will be addressed. So at the time of our May meeting, I will bring the remaining books and summaries to you and recommendations. What is different are my final recommendations, and with no offense to the committee for the work that they've done, but I did take into consideration several factors, and I want to clarify those here. It's not that I did not honor and respect the recommendations of the committee. However, I also looked at the current placement of the books. So when we say a book was at middle school and high school, if it's living in 12 high schools and 1 middle school, it's really not comprehensively at middle schools across the district. So I did look at where the books were living and how many of our schools have them. For example, there is a book on here that is only in 1 school in the entire school district, and that the committee had reviewed. And so it's important for me to look at not only that, where is the book currently, so that we're not looking to expand its presence in other schools without reason or justification. Additionally, I looked at the recommendations for their grade level placement by the publishers and by the author, well, by the publishers, because I think that's important as well, because when we start talking about book placement, many school districts have not done this level of review for challenged materials that we have. Many of them have simply said, what's the grade level band? If it falls within that grade level band, we're retaining it or removing it. I believe that we did a far more comprehensive review and took into consideration all the concerns that were expressed to us. Ultimately, what I did was I looked at all those factors, the grade level recommendation from the publisher. I did take into consideration a recommendation from the committee. I very much specifically looked at the current placement of all of those books so that I would not make a recommendation to the board or for the school district as in its entirety to either retain a book or expand its presence unnecessarily. So for the Kite Runner, the recommendation is to retain it at middle school and high school level. For drama, my recommendation is to retain it at middle and high school levels. For George, it's to retain at all school levels. For the Vincent boys, it's to retain it at high school level only. For Beloved, it's to retain at high school level only. And then for 19 minutes, retain at high school level only. It's Perfectly Normal, retain it at high school level only. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, retain at high school level. 13 Reasons Why, retain it at middle and high school level. Real Live Boyfriends, retain at high school level. The Bluest Eye, retain at high school level. And Tricks, retain at high school level. So all of the books right now that have been reviewed, the recommendations retain them. There were some changes to grade level recommendations. This is my recommendation to the board at this time. Again, I'll bring a comprehensive summary, and I will actually make sure that we put it over multiple slides so it's easier to see for everyone reviewing. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fortney.
Can you repeat 19 minutes recommendation by you, please?
"19 minutes is to retain at high school level only."
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, in summary then, in looking at what the committee recommended and what you're recommending, I only see your recommendations changing for 3 of the books. Is that correct?
At this time, yes,
At this
ma'am.
time, it's perfectly normal to take it out of middle. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, I should say high school only, excuse me. And then Real Live Boyfriends, high school only.
And drama, we retained at middle and high school only,
Wait a
based off
minute.
my recommendation.
Yeah,
Yes,
but that's was theirs too. Middle and high school is what they recommended.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just trying to make sure. And then my question is, I'm still in the process of doing my due diligence on these books. So, so are we going to have this brought again then at the work session for us to discuss? Because we'll be voting on May the 10th, am I correct?
So, in speaking with Mr. Bridges, there is no requirement for the board to vote on this item. The board, as a matter of policy, does not approve the adoption of materials at the school level in its media centers. The board retains the right to make a motion, so if the board would like to officially vote on this matter, then obviously someone can make a motion, and if their colleague, at least three of their colleagues agree, then they could make a motion to add it to the agenda for the 10th for an actual vote from the board. But looking at policy, we did not want to deviate from existing policy and create an issue when we didn't have to.
I'm just trying to understand the process.
Yes, ma'am.
So are
But
you
the 10th,
saying
I will bring the final list with all final recommendations of all 16 books
on the May the 10th?
on May the 10th
At
in
work
workshop.
session?
Yes, ma'am.
So that we can talk about them?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, sir, I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Yes,
All right.
ma'am. Ms. Miller.
Can you please review the current process or the proposed process for parents who want to limit access to any books in our schools?
Actually, I think what we've come up with is a very thorough process that is very similar to what we're doing with our human growth and development as far as our transparency and empowering parents, which is very clearly an interest in the state of Florida and the legislature. So what we will allow is there will be an electronic login where parents can go in. They'll be able to log into their child's school, and they'll be able to see every book within the current library. Parents then can make an informed decision and opt their child out of certain books by checking the boxes next to them. Once they do that, it's important, though, that we set some expectations for this, just as we do for human growth and development, and this would be part of the back-to-school process. All the forms and documents that will go home to parents will very clearly and articulately explain this to families in multiple languages. They'll have multiple options to do this, but starting with the 22-23 school year, that electronic form will be provided to all families, but it must be completed no later than August 1st, or no later than 15 days after a new student is enrolled, because there's always the possibility, as we know, our enrollment is very fluid. A student could enroll on December 1st. At the end of the day, we need to set an expectation for when the parent needs to provide us with informed consent as it relates to these materials. And so they have 15 days past the registration enrollment date in which to do so. This would be required to be completed every year. The reason for that is we want to make sure that, especially in those situations where students are transitioning between certain grade levels, for example, second and third, or specific school levels, elementary to middle, middle to high, that we're capturing this information in real time and it reflects the family's most current interests. If a family does not complete the form, just as with other things, essentially it will default to full access. And so that's the process that we currently have put in place. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to communicate this to families, provide them with access. The current process for parents to actually get this information is quite laborious. We're going to have to create a system outside of the current Destiny system that's going to better facilitate this. And then that information will be conveyed back to the schools and it'll have to be uploaded. But again, parents would have until August 1st to complete it, or 15 days post their child's enrollment. It has to be done annually. And if you do not complete the form, it defaults to access, to full access. That is currently the proposal and my recommendation. Ms. Miller.
I have two questions. Are they going to have, if parents go into that catalog, can they select by recommendations on genre, or is it just by title? They're going to have to go through a litany of titles.
It's title and theme.
And theme. There are themes.
Correct.
And I'm a little concerned with the August 1st date, only because we don't start then.
Correct, but I need enough time for my staff to take the information and ensure it transfers over so we don't find ourselves in a situation where it's not properly documented and uploaded and a student gets access to a book that they should not have gotten access to. So I understand the burden it's real, but it's real for all of us.
Okay, I might have further. I will process that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fields.
My question is, I know that there's new legislation in Tallahassee, and I know that that doesn't become effective until July 1. Is there any chance of the decisions that you would be making being reversed based on the new legislation?
Based off current legislation that's proposed to be enacted as of July 1st, there is nothing that would interfere with the recommendations or the process that we've followed to date.
And the other comment that I was going to make is what you said, is that I didn't think that we were required to vote on the books, that would be a decision for you. So you clarified that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Wilson.
So I have a prepared statement I'd like to read, and then I also have some comments I'd like to share. First of all, we were all presented with passages from these books, from certain of these books, and I never tied those passages to any particular books because I didn't want to be accused of making a decision based on themes or genres, although I still have been. And so my focus was always on the passages. And let me say I respect the work of the committee. I know they work very hard and very diligently at this, but still, I have some concerns. And so I'll read this prepared statement. I submit that the book banning in Polk County schools was never about banning books. It was always about age appropriateness. None of the books reviewed, well, that's not true. Apparently there are some. At this time, the books reviewed had not been recommended for all grades. I guess there is one that has been. The review committee, comprised of a diverse group of Polk County citizens, has recommended specific grade levels for all of the books reviewed. Accordingly, the review committee has effectively suggested banning books in those certain grade levels. I find it interesting that when the concerns about these books were brought forward, the initiative was labeled as book banning. However, now that a diverse committee has reviewed the books, it's quite acceptable to disallow access to the books for certain students. Nevertheless, they will be banned in some schools due to age appropriateness, which, by the way, was always the issue. It was never about banning books. It was always about age appropriateness. Many concerned constituents have reached out to me about banning books in Polk County. In every case, they were focused on the individuals that brought the complaint forward and not on the issue itself. Some agree that there was an age appropriateness issue, but most remain completely immersed in their book banning perspective. I trust that the books under review have literary value. I don't question that. Still, some of the passages are so vile, so callous, and so dehumanizing that we cannot read them aloud in a room of adults. These are passages of sexual violence and vile and offensive profanity. However, we somehow find that those same passages are appropriate for our students. It occurs to me that this matter should have been labeled age appropriateness from the outset so that we could have had the appropriate discussion about it as a community. I think that labeling this book banning has been done by certainly the press and many folks in our community has created an environment or a climate that makes finding an appropriate solution incredibly difficult. We have a movie rating system in our country, and movies that depict violent sexual acts, movies that include vile and offensive profanity get a rating. And I believe that many of the passages that I've read, if those books were turned into movies, they would be rated R, meaning that students under the age of 17 wouldn't be able to go to those movies without parental permission. Yet we're saying it's okay for those same students to read the books. There's something logically wrong about that. We can't read those passages in a room of adults. They're that vile. Yet we say it's okay for our students to read them. There's just something fundamentally wrong about that from my perspective. We asked the committee to review those books based on context, but yet I can't find anyone who can define that for me. What does that mean? What does context mean? Should they review them based on genre? Should they review them based on theme? Should they review them based on the time in history that they occurred? What does context mean? I mean, typically context means that typically context clarifies something that was said, right? Well, look, profanity always clarifies someone's state of mind. So what does that mean when we talk about context? Is somebody's context okay and somebody else's context is not okay? I think that's a more slippery slope than the term book banning. And by the way, this is nothing, this is not even the same universe as book banning that occurred in Nazi Germany, where books were removed from society. This doesn't even, it's not even close. I think it denigrates what we're doing here, and I think it diminishes the seriousness of what happened in Nazi Germany, because this is not the same thing. This is about age appropriateness for our students. You know, I've talked to a lot of folks. I said, help me understand. I'm desperately trying to understand the other side of this argument, because the reality is, and this is what I hear across the board, it really is about genres and themes, because those same passages in some contexts would not be allowed. But we feel like these certain genres and themes are so important in society today that these passages of sexual violence and vile profanity that wouldn't be acceptable in some circumstances are now somehow acceptable. And I think that's just going down the wrong road. So I still have some concerns about what's happened. I appreciate the work the committee has done. I appreciate the work you've done. I still have, like Ms. Cunningham, some work to do myself, but I can't, it's stunning to me that our community hasn't read these passages and said, wait a minute, it's not about banning books. We're not talking about taking these books out of society. We're not talking about taking them out of our local libraries. We're just saying here, we want parents to have choices. And, if somebody doesn't want their children to have access to that kind of profanity and that kind of sexual violence, then I think they shouldn't. And honestly, I don't care about the genres or the themes. I have no issue with that. But I wouldn't want my children reading some of those passages when they were in school here in Polk County. So I want to share that because I think we got started down the wrong road with this. And so I don't think we really have had the appropriate conversation yet, and probably won't. But, those are just my thoughts. There's 7 of us. There's a reason for that. And those are just my thoughts. So thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Miller?
Wes, it would be a great time for Wes to not share the history of this, but from his perspective as a board member, I have a lot of questions. I appreciate, as a parent, that I have the responsibility for my own child and what she will see or what he will see. And I can go through and see the precedent set for some of these that have had the same conversations, some of the older ones who've been under consideration and removed or not removed since the 70s, especially for a couple of these that are older. But I need Wes as the legal counsel for this board to talk about the background and/or liability of these issues.
Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry to give you that.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, these are globally, these are not new issues. The themes change, but the issues have stayed the same, I guess, since books were invented. And they're throughout history, the books are the history books are replete with examples of times when people or groups of people would take issue with books that were then in circulation and would attempt to keep them out of the hands of people for whatever reason, some of those more meritorious than others. Yeah, I think most of the people at the table are of a vintage that can remember things that went down back in the 70s and 80s and the books that were challenged then. These are a different set of books now. Some of the issues or the themes are new, but the concern remains the same. You have groups of people in the community who, for whatever reason, do not hold with the content of certain books and would like those to not be available. Recently, there's been a good deal of confusion in social media. All sorts of things have flown around about districts banning books and whatnot. My outreach to my colleagues in the School Board Attorneys Association suggests that at this point, there's not much in Florida that has gone down in terms of banning books. There have been books that have been removed from the shelves during the review period. But I've seen lists flying around of dozens of books that people said districts have now banned these books. My understanding is that universally those books have been removed from circulation while they are reviewed using the policies and the practices of those various districts. I'm sure you're all familiar with the school board policy on this, which is 9130. And it's actually in the community relations section. It has to do with public complaints regarding a variety of different topics, one of which happens to be instructional materials and library books. And the one thing that immediately strikes me when we started the conversation is, in at least 25 years, I don't believe that I've ever seen the school board of Polk County address the issue of whether particular materials should be removed. Now, we've had a similar process for all those years to the ones in the current policy, but the reviews have been conducted at the school level with recommendations to the superintendent. Then the superintendent has advised the school board of the action taken. And I think that because of the outcry in the current situation and the sheer number, the number of materials that have been challenged, the superintendent has tried to create has created a more centralized function to do essentially the same task that has previously been done in that context. I'm going to go through this very quickly. The policy says that the school board is responsible for the content of instructional materials and other materials used in classrooms made available in school libraries or included on reading lists. And it talks about the availability of that material. Upon written request, an individual will be provided access to material or books specified in the written request so they can look at it. And the people who could object to materials are the parents of students in the district and residents of the county. And it talks about how the challenges should be brought. If there's a complaint to be addressed by the principal, it should be addressed to the principal in writing and includes the author, the title of publisher, the complainant's familiarity with the material challenged, the sections challenged by name, by page and item, so that folks who are reviewing it can go to the material that is concerned, and a the complaint needs to articulate whether the challenged material contains content that is pornographic, prohibited under Florida law, which is Florida Statute 847, that is not suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented, or is inappropriate for the grade level and age group for which the material is used. So all of this sounds familiar at this point, right? And further, when the information comes in, the principal is required to advise the regional assistant superintendent, chief learning officer of the complaint, appoint a review committee, which may consist of one or more instructional staff members, including an appropriate content area teacher. Once again, this has been elevated to a centralized function so that it can address the volume of works that are being referenced. And that the committee, when it does its review, is supposed to look at the appropriateness of the material for the age and maturity level of the students with whom it is being used, the accuracy of the material, the objectivity of the material, the use being made of the material. And the committee then makes a recommendation to the superintendent in writing, and the superintendent advises the complainant in writing of the committee's recommendation and advises the school board of the action that's taken or recommended. If the complainant is not satisfied with the result, there is a provision in the policy that allows them within 30 days to appeal to the board in writing through written request of the superintendent, who forwards the request and all the materials relating to it to the school board, and the school board reviews the case and advises the complainant in writing of a decision. So there is a circumstance under which this can come to the board. So if there is if the recommendation is challenged, the superintendent will present it to you, and you will have the opportunity to review that. And the standard is that the board shall discontinue use of any material that's challenged under the policy if it contains content that is A, pornographic, or B, prohibited under Florida Statute 847012. That's the harmful to minors statute that has been referenced several times. Whether it is not suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend the material presented, or is inappropriate to the grade level and age group for which the material is used. So that is how it is laid out in policy. And once again, for at least the last 25 years, this is a policy that's been essentially carried out at the school level. And here, if there is a challenge, there are circumstances under which that it may come to the school board and you may be asked to take an action. But that is sort of the history, where we are, how we got here. It's a little confusing if you try to look at it in a global sense. This policy is generally aimed at allowing the school board or the school district to review materials. You'll recall the initial complaint here is something that has been brought with the suggestion of criminal prosecution for employees because these books remain on the shelves in libraries where many of them have been for many years. And I'm advised where many of them have never been circulated, if at all. And that is a different analysis. The process we have here is an administrative process that allows district personnel to review these materials and make these determinations. It goes without saying that no matter what the decision or the recommendation of the committee is, or what the recommendation of the superintendent might be, it's likely that there are going to be people who are unhappy with that result. And if, in fact, we have reached a time and a stage in our political discourse where folks are inclined to go and challenge these things in the court, they have the opportunity to do that, and there's not much that the school district as a defendant could do to stop that from happening, other than decide whose request you're going to grant. But basically what that means is that if people come in and challenge the books and the superintendent recommends removing them and the board acts on that recommendation, then there are folks who may object to that and may complain loudly and may wish to litigate. Likewise, if the recommendation is not to accede to those requests, there are folks who might not like that result and might seek to litigate. There are, right now, if you follow the news, you'll see there are folks out there who appear to be looking for opportunities to challenge the status quo, whatever the status quo may be. And sometimes you have to sit back and decide for yourself, which lawsuit would I rather defend? So I think that it's anybody's guess what the legal landscape on this will look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But historically, up until now, materials in libraries have been, the First Amendment has been widely viewed as protecting decisions as to what goes into libraries, especially as you contrast that to instructional materials that are required. Things on the shelves in library that are not required reading are there at the option of the student, and the history on that and the court cases that have wound their way up to and including the Supreme Court of the United States have protected the discretion of folks who have decided what to put in libraries. It's my understanding that in many cases, individual books are not selected and purchased and placed on those shelves, that there are large purchases that include collections of works that have been curated by outside vendors, and school districts come in and buy a package that includes many books. And the state has generally not been in the business of going down and reviewing those lists and determining whether or not there are those books there that should not be there. But once again, the language here that rings in my ear in your policy is that no challenged material may be removed from the curriculum, which is instructional materials, or from a collection of resource materials, library materials, except by action of the board, and no challenged material may be removed solely because it presents ideas that may be unpopular or offensive to some. Any board action to remove material will be accompanied by the board's statement of its reasons for the removal. So that captures in a nutshell the issues that may be before you if there's a challenge to the recommendation and the advice that the superintendent brings to the board. If individuals choose to challenge under this policy, that will be the standard of your review, and we'll talk about it and advise you more thoroughly at that time. Yes, ma'am.
So the way I'm looking at this, we are looking at an opportunity to look at this group of books as far as them being placed in libraries and what is age appropriate. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that a lot of people who have contacted me thus far, again, I'm not done with my due diligence, want the opportunity to be able to select what their child can read. Because some of these books are used as curriculum. Let me be clear. My daughter graduated from here 2 years ago. We had a 2-hour conversation about these books last night. Because to me, it's very important that the children, as you've indicated, that served, as well as those who have had the opportunity, some of these books are really awesome. And they provide opportunities for children, young adults, YAs as they call themselves, young adults, to learn about things that are going on in the world and have a discussion through curriculum in their classrooms. And I think that's very important that we keep that. So I think as we talk, curriculum is one thing versus a child walking into a library and deciding, oh, I'm just going to grab this book off the shelf and I'm going to read it. So what I'm hearing from some parents, curriculum needs to remain as it remains. But the access to the book on a library without the ability to have a class discussion about it and talk about the implications of that book, that's where a parent wants the right to be able to say, I do or don't want my child walking into library X, Y, or Z on a Polk County School Board campus and accessing a book regarding this topic. So I think as we all, go home and think about it and talk to your people and the folks in your, group of influence, keep that in mind, because we don't want to take away the opportunity for literary novels to be expressed in our schools, because our students learn from that, because there's an engaging conversation that happens in a classroom. And we have some awesome, awesome English teachers and literature teachers across this district. So I just want to leave you, that's my perspective so far on this topic. So I will be very interested to see your recommendation, and I know we're not voting, but your recommendation next time as to how parents, regardless of what date you choose, how do I as a parent, if I don't want my middle school child going and reading book X as we start school in August, how does that piece work? Because I want to ensure that what we do enables a parent to make that decision for a child walking into a library versus what a child is going to be focusing on as reading curriculum for their academic English class. And I think it's two different things, and I think that's kind of where we're at. So I'll be looking forward to how we can enact that, and I think a lot of the issues that I'm hearing from parents, that's what they want to know. How can I make sure that my kid doesn't have access to this particular book, genre, scene, whatever words you want to use, and give them that option? And I know that's a huge feat. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think we're going to hopefully solve a lot of these issues, because we are not in the book banning business. Thank you.
Ms. Fortney and Ms. Miller.
Yeah, I am all for a parent being able to monitor and teach and learn with their child. And I believe this plan with the opt-out, and I agree with you, Ms. Cunningham, 110%. I would love to see parents sit down with their child and be open and honest and discuss. And I think that's every parent's right to do that. And I just hope that it is a seamless, like you said, and it's easy access, so that, I spent 33 and a half years begging parents to come in my classroom. And I think that is probably the most positive thing that might come out of this whole thing, is that developing that community relationship to get rid of the distrust. So, thank you, Ms. Cunningham, for those comments.
Ms. Miller?
When you return in May, I would also be interested, we have a lot of things happening in this district, and we have gone over and beyond what most districts have done with these book reviews, and there'll be other books that'll be challenged or have interest. And you just shared, which I may have had that before, but it reminded me that one of these books was in one library. And we have used district staff and time, and, I don't know that the
Well,
district...
to be clear, I feel the need to say this. 5 have not been checked out in over 3 years.
Right. So when the next book comes along, and some of these books have been challenged since the 70s, I was shocked to see how many counties that The Bluest Eye has been through, and like 14 counties since it was released. So I'm interested in the history of this, but I'm more interested in procedure. So as we move forward, as the kids wait for us to discuss other things that are very pertinent to families and parental choice, that we have something that we can provide to the public. So if this comes up, they can go to their school. Because if one book is in one school, I'm not sure we need to be conducting countywide meetings over that. I think the school family, the learning community, the SAC committee, they should be talking about what's good for their school and their students. One, this isn't, you know, I think we're here to help students, you know, like Mr. Wilson mentioned, you know, the press releases and the coverage, making it something that it's not, bigger than it is, bigger than it should be, I don't think is the focus of anybody. And we need to take it back to where these books are, where the school issues are. If you're driving from another county or 2 cities away to talk about a book that may be in one school, I don't want to use our resources in that manner because we're so limited. So when you come back in May, I would like to see a procedure so we can offer that to others, because this isn't the first group of books that will have concerns. I am concerned that as a parent, I'm going to have to go through a litany of books and/or genres. Are the parents made aware of what's checked out, or is it you only can check what? So you're going to say no to these genres or yes and not check the box, and then the child's going to check a book out, and as a concerned parent, I'm going to look at the book that comes home from the library.
There are some legal issues that we have to work through as it relates to disclosing some books. That's one of the reasons why Destiny Follett retracted their willingness to assist us in this, is why we're having to develop our own process and our own database in which to do this. So Follett, as you recall, when we initially had conversations, we were excited because they had agreed to provide and work with us and their programmers to develop better internal systems to better facilitate parents' knowledge of what my child's checking out and how do I flag certain items, whether it's by genre or by title, that I don't want my child having access to. Destiny then, almost 2 weeks later, had a full reversal in their decision and said they would not support the development of any of those utilities. And so, quite respectfully, we are actually in the market right now to see what other companies are available. But there are some legal issues that we are currently exploring as it relates to making sure that parents have access to that content as far as what their child's checked out. And so I will hopefully will have an answer for you in May. One of your colleagues also, I'll bring up a conversation I had with Dr. Allen. You know, he's brought up concerns with book challenges. And what does that mean if somebody wants to challenge that same book 5 years from now, or at the individual school level? Traditionally, our policy has said once a book is challenged, the decision it's moot, it's done. But he did bring up an interesting scenario, which is what if there's a new iteration of that book? What if there's a new publication? What if it's a textbook? So, for example, one of the books in the 16 can be classified as a text, even though it only resides in our media center as a textbook. What if that's been updated? Does that then reopen the opportunity? So policy will have to be reviewed and revised as it relates to this process. I fully agree. You know, and I think we've learned a lot of valuable lessons throughout the process, and we've done more than our due diligence, with all due respect. And it's a difficult process, but I commend everyone who dedicated their time. Ms. Everett deserves, and her team deserve every accolade I could espouse on them and share here publicly. She managed the process like a champion. The two of them, I'm sorry, managed the process like true champions, maintained their professionalism, maintained the integrity, always brought the question back and helped our stakeholders focus. But she's done an amazing job maneuvering this. And it's a difficult conversation for many. You know, Ms. Everett, I'm not going to put her out there and say that I can speak for her. She and I have, quite honestly, not had a conversation about her personal opinions. But I will tell you, by and large, your media specialists and those who are in the business of teaching literacy have been very much offended by the process because they feel like they have to defend that right and access. And I would say she's never imparted her personal views and values throughout the process. And I think that's important to note. But again, from Joe McNaughton and Everett, the team, everybody else involved, what an amazing job they've done. And I think, quite honestly, I'll keep holding up our process. Say what you will about the outcome. And I think Mr. Wilson said it very well. There's always going to continue to be public debate about whether or not the ultimate decision or recommendation is the right decision. I think what we've done is acted in good faith to honor grade level expectations, empowering parents to make informed decisions, and to place additional restrictions as they see fit as a family. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for us. But I would hold our process up against anyone's as far as the transparency. We taped all of our meetings. We posted them online. Anybody can see them and watch the meetings in their entirety. And so, again, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the team for being here late most evenings, and to the video team, Mr. Geary and everybody else behind the scenes who have to also be here I did get to leave one meeting recently. I think about 20 minutes early, they told me to go home because I was coughing so loud in the back of the room. I think I was disrupting the activity. So Mr. Geary politely said, you need to go home. And I appreciate that. But, and Ms. Winchester and Elizabeth Warren, you know, who have tag teamed being here to take notes. And it's a true effort. And again, I think, Mr. Wilson, much to your credit, it's not about book banning. It's about ensuring that the content and materials we provide access to are age and developmentally appropriate, but that we're honoring the core values of public education as well. And then finally, honoring parent choice. And I think we're going to be able to do that in a very respectful way. And I think, quite honestly, if there's going to be the best response that we're going to get, the best feedback we will get about this process will not be those who are displeased with the current process or the outcome or what happens on May 10th. It will be how many parents take the initiative to fill out the form. If the overwhelming majority of our families do not fill out the form, there's your community standard. It's been established. Because we're providing the opportunity for them to be informed and partners. You've heard me say this. We've got to move our parents and students from being passengers in education to truly being partners in our education system. And the only way to do that is by being informed and empowered to play a role in this. And so you will see very aggressive messaging coming out from us. And Ms. Miller, if we have to change the August 1st date, that's fine. But it has to be at least 2 weeks before the start of school, respectfully, if we could, because we give me enough time to make sure we can transfer the data. But again, I think that's going to be a strong response. What better survey than us messaging this consistently? This will be covered in the media. This will not just be something that goes out in a district email that gets ignored or on social media posting. This will be everywhere for parents to be informed as to their rights and the process that they can follow. And I'll be interested to see how many parents take advantage of it. Not as a measure of evaluating their personal beliefs, but where was this general pulse of our community as a whole as it relates to this topic? And I think that's going to be a very informal piece of survey data we will get. We can make all kinds of assumptions about it. It's not the best survey, but it will be informative. And we'll see where it goes. But I'm very pleased with the process we've done to date. And, you know, again, I've had to make some recommendations that I feel are in the best interest of our students moving forward. And again, looking holistically at where the books are at, what their purpose and intent are. But you're absolutely right. Beloved was a book that was brought up quite frequently because it is part of what students are tested on in the AP exam, the accelerated placement exam. And so it's an interesting conversation. Do you eliminate a text that's going to subject students to potentially scoring worse on their AP exams? But I think you said, Ms. Cunningham, as well. I mean, every board member really brings a lot to the table into the conversation and the narrative. But when you said, you know, that guided instruction is really important. Very recently, we had a parent, as recently as last week, Ms. Miller knows the context behind this, who was very upset about a passage that was included in the ELA classroom and felt that it was inappropriate. And initially, the conversation was that was a district-approved material. It was not. It is part of the state-adopted support materials for best standards. And so even the state of Florida has controversial text that some may find offensive that's included in the curriculum recommendations that we receive. And I think, quite honestly, and I'm going to provide that passage to you all, because I think when you read that, it really is. I think, you know, Mr. Wilson has spoken frequently about, he's personally read some of those passages, and I've read that one, and in all honesty, have found that to be more offensive than I have some of the other passages and books we've been reading and reviewing. So it is very interesting, and it's very much in the eye of the beholder. But I would say thank you to the board for supporting this process. We know that the conversation will evolve from here, and we'll see where it goes, but I think we've done the best we can at this point. So, Mr. Wilson.
You know, I mentioned that I don't think it's helpful when the press uses terms like book banning, and I want to commend Kimberly Moore. She's really done a remarkable job of representing the situation fairly and honestly, and you know, it's difficult for the press in general. They have limited resources, and so they're trying to report on things the best they can, but I don't think they have the resources to really delve into a situation, understand what's happening, and understand that it makes it difficult for communities to find solutions when things are maybe not intentionally sensationalized, but they're sensationalized. And then we have to overcome those hurdles. And it really makes it tough, whether it's a school board or, a city or town or whatever. So, I want to make it clear that I appreciate her reporting on this, because I think she's done a remarkable job of representing this as fairly as possible.
Dr. Allen.
Yeah, a very thorough process indeed. Going back in just the context of the committee work, and we discussed our students involved in that process, was their outcome and their vote reflective in the final numbers as well?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Student votes counted in the.
That's great.
And board members, you received the tallies as well, so you'll know, we captured all of that. I know that's been FOIA'd in the past, so you know every board member, because they had to sign it. It's a signed vote, so we, yes, sir, it's
Indeed.
reflected in there.
So, in this conversation, if we throw out a question of what is media, a lot of times we say television, internet, and yada yada, and really, in essence, book is a medium as well. So as we move to a very technological, saturated school district with our one-to-one devices, I think these conversations are going to continue as well. And I think this really demonstrates our thoroughness and, consideration of what students are being exposed to. So just as we put so much infrastructure around filtering software and so forth, obviously books are way different, but they are a medium that requires the same thing. So I appreciate the process. It's been very thorough. So thank you.
Okay. District organizational chart is the last item under the superintendent's report today. Board members were provided that. Subsequently, board members asked for an additional copy. You were provided that. So you have both the regular org chart and the org chart with names. I'll ask Mr. Pitts, Mr. Warren, and Mr. Green, where appropriate, to please come forward and make comments or address any questions from the board. A quick point of clarification. The org chart is reflective of any position changes or recommendations that the board had previously approved, but includes only those positions in their current form. The only changes within the org chart were if a department had a vacancy or was going to consolidate positions. So there are no new requests within the board, within the org chart. That's different. The board will see a staffing plan, staffing recommendation or request in May. So the two are very different. The org chart is reflective of current staff at the district office and within the respective departments that had to be cost neutral. So any changes, as you saw, there's a considerable savings that will return back to the budget after all of this. I'm very proud of that, as I promised you, and I think we've done a great job in managing that process. But if you recall, several months ago, we began a process of reviewing every single job description. What we have found is there will be some jobs that we need to comprehensively bring forward to alter. That doesn't necessarily adversely impact the org chart. Those are just positional changes. The problem was when you conflate the two, for an example, the board, I believe in your packet, sees an overall savings of roughly $600,000, maybe $700,000 when everything is said and done in the current org chart. However, as we went through departments, and departments were requesting additional positions and or enhancements to current positions, some were justified by job duties and responsibility review, some were not, some were simple requests. That came to little over $2 million in additional requests, if I'm correct. And so we separated those because, as I promised you, our commitment is to go back and look at how we are staffing our schools and to address the disparities within our current structures. Our priority will always be schools and classrooms while taking care of our staff as well. So you will see that summary before you in May. I can assure the board there is no way the board's going to approve holistically any aspect of the staffing plan. The board will have an opportunity to say, we like this plan because all the staffing plan options I will bring before you will be multiple year implementation. So for example, if we were to say that we're going to change the way we staff schools for guidance counselors, for custodians, and for secretarial staff or deans and administrators, you will see that reflected change. So for example, right now at an elementary school, they get an assistant principal. Once they hit they automatically get an assistant principal. They qualify for a second assistant principal once they exceed a certain student enrollment threshold. What's interesting, and I'll use Willow Oak as a great example of why we need to address this, and Ms. Fortney is very familiar with this example, but who better than Michelle Townsley to articulate the need? It's interesting that the elementary school staffing, when it comes to administrative and support staff, is vastly different had she been a middle school with the same student enrollment. So we have these disparities in enrollment. So that's why I'm sharing all this background information with you, because as we look to the future, we're trying to balance elevating current salaries and respecting our employees and making them feel valued, at the same time while we're adjusting what we have to do to better serve our students directly in the classrooms. So there's going to have to be a balance between there. Financially, we cannot jump that hurdle in 1 year. It's simply not attainable. So what you will see in the staffing plan are multiple year phases and implementations as to how we're prioritizing positions so that we can accomplish this slowly, but we can also be transparent with everybody in our organization to say, this is how the district is proceeding. So I think that's important to denote that the two things are very different. The org chart, again, reflects current staff and any changes we could accomplish without an increased cost to the district. The second group are going to be those additional new positions and or changes to current job descriptions. One example, for example, comes out of operations, or more importantly, out of Rob Davis's shop, where he has supervisors who are making less money than the people they supervise. However, there's a different fix for that. It doesn't have to be salary. What it could simply be is that we qualify and allow supervisors, and what we're talking about is that the employees, because they are eligible for so frequently for overtime, they're earning more money, so they're earning more than their supervisors. A simple fix is allow supervisors to work for overtime as well. Eliminate that barrier and give them equal access to those dollars. I know it sounds like a simple fix, and Jason always cringes when I make these examples because he's always like, he always pulls me aside and says, Fred, it's never that simple. And I just tell him, make it that simple. But that's what we're dealing with. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background and clarification because I've spoken to several of you about the org chart and you've had questions about it, and I think that's important. The other thing I'd like to note that I was not able to address this year in the org chart, but I will bring back next year, is the regional structure. So what we were able to do here in the org chart was add additional senior executive directors. Why? When I arrived here, and let's be honest, when the board had to go outside the school district, a lot of you very much commented to me, Mr. Hyde, we need more succession leadership and we need more opportunities. I interviewed every single senior director and cabinet level position when I first arrived. I met with every single one of them to talk to them about their departments, to talk to them about their needs, what they thought we did well, where they think we could improve. And one other question I asked them was, who's your number two that you're training to take your place? And I mean this in all honesty. We did not have a single department that could point to a number two. Not one. And so,
I think we told you that in the interview.
you did, well, it's important for me to found that out as well and verify, validate, right? Trust but validate. But at the end of the day, what we've done here with the senior director role is we've created a pathway to a regional. We've created and started to take the steps to how do you take somebody from a school level position, from a principal's perspective. I would tell you that if we were to interview our current regional assistant superintendents, I was looking to see if anybody was here, they would all acknowledge that when you make that initial transition without any additional assistance and or guidance or experience, your tendency is to try and get everybody else to lead their buildings the way you led yours. That is not how a regional should function. The regional needs to function to groom and mentor and allow young administrators to grow within the specificity of needs that they have at their building, and work with them to find effective strategies to do it, but not to approach it as a cookie cutter. And then as regionals get experience, they realize that's not the model that's going to work. I have to coach, I have to mentor, I have to model. The problem for our current regionals is the volume of schools they're supporting and the amount of needs that they're having to address on a daily basis, whether it's a constituent complaint, whether it's a facilities issue, whether it's an HR issue or an operational issue. They're not getting the time to address the instructional and coaching and mentorship that needs to take place. I've had conversations with you about our inability at times to have assigned formal mentors to young aspiring administrators to ensure that they're successful. We're doing more of that now. And so what this is allowing us to do is start to set the stage as we have regionals who are retiring, as we have regionals, and we do. It's important for us to create opportunities for us to groom and mentor those administrators outside of their schools. So what the senior directors will do, I'm using this as an example, is they will take over all the HR, operationals, and constituent issues. They're going to, and there's not one per region, there's 3 recommended in the org chart, and that way they'll support all 5 regions. It's very important that we create that opportunity for them to grow outside of their current roles. And then eventually when a regional director becomes available, or a regional assistant superintendent position becomes available, that's then our bench to recruit from. I think that's important for us to look at. Additionally, in the org chart for the regionals, we currently still have 5 regionals. My recommendation next year, and I'm setting the stage for this, is that we have 5 regionals plus a turnaround office. Right now, with Ms. Barnes, and I'll use her because she's over the school improvement schools, the fact that Ms. Barnes has schools permanently assigned to her or schools that move between her back to a regional creates a breakdown. If Pat Barnes and her team are directly instrumental in helping a school improve and exit DA status or prevent their ever entering DA status, because we've identified more schools that we feel are underperforming and could be doing better, and we're providing supports to them beyond just the DA designation, then what's missing right now at times is the connection back to the regional. So when that school exits and goes back to the regional, if the regional was not directly involved in all that work, then we've dropped the ball. I hate to use a sports analogy, but we're fumbling. And that person cannot speak to the work, they can't support the work. It's not because they're incompetent, they just weren't directly involved in it. And so what needs to happen is the school turnaround office eventually needs to be completely removed from the regional structure, meaning having assigned schools to them. They will act in a support role to support the regionals and the schools under them. And as we're adding schools, I think there's very much a strong justification to look to add a 5th true regional assistant superintendent in the upcoming year, supported by the 3 senior executive directors, or I think senior executive directors, I used the right terminology. So I want to use as an example of what you do see here, but where we may be going in a year, and I don't want to conflate the issue, and I know that probably is going to confuse you more, but we did not make that change this year. We did not feel comfortable making that recommendation at this time. Ms. Cunningham.
Just a quick question. So, obviously you're looking, down the road because you have to plan for these things, and we appreciate that you are. So my question would be, I understand we're looking at current org charts, and you just explained the path in which you're looking to proceed, for next year. So could you say that you're on a 3-year, 4-year, 5, what kind of track are you on to accomplish all this?
Well, for the org chart,
Yes, sir.
by next year, it will be done.
Done.
It will
Okay.
be solidified, and we'll be very confident in where we are.
Okay.
But that's the last change I would bring for the board organizationally.
Yes, sir. From the financial?
Now, could there be additional position requests? So, for
Sure.
example, we have within the org chart request, again, funded through some federal dollars, so there's no cost to the general fund, although I guess all revenue comes in. This is where Jason and I get in trouble with Jason and Heather. All money, in their opinion, all money goes into the general fund, and it gets spent from there. I always try and separate the pots of money. There are 7 truancy officers. Truancy is a big issue for us. And right now, the problem is the burden is heaped upon just the social workers in the schools. The truancy officer will serve as a liaison, so when the school triggers a red flag for a student who's not showing up, who's frequently tardy, frequently absent, then the truancy officer will become involved, make a connection with the family, establish in partnership with the school and the family a plan to help improve that student's outcomes and daily attendance, and then they'll stay in contact with the school. The social worker still maintains that at the school level because they're there on a daily basis, but the truancy officer serves in that capacity to help us start to address and chip away at those students who are frequently absent. Because we have to identify the root cause. Why are students missing school? And then how do we address and create a plan to help them be successful? And so you see that in there as well. But I bring that up because If that's successful and we
Yes.
see that there's a demonstration that maybe there weren't enough of them,
Sure.
there might be a request to add.
Oh, I understand,
but-
I understand. Yeah, okay. So basically, within the year, by this time next year, your organization will
Your
be
chart will be
where you
solidified.
would like it to be. That was my question.
That is correct,
Thank you,
yes, ma'am.
sir.
Ms. Miller?
I think transparency is really important here, because people are waiting, and I know they're already reporting salaries, and you're looking at that, but we have multiple areas where people are serving in a capacity that's probably not equitable if they're supervising, a lot of people and someone in a similar role isn't. I mean, there's all of those questions that's gone on now for decades to where it's just piled into this. So I'm glad that we're looking at this, and if we can show them a plan of we're trying to get you out of that, I think we'll retain more employees, because when they don't know and we keep approving new positions and they see the salaries of new people coming in and they're just been sitting there, we've given them no succession planning opportunities, we've given them no transparency, and when, their income will change, I mean, we just lose them quickly. So I'm hoping that will help. You mentioned the truancy officers. Even with that, and we can talk about that at a different time, but, we have 20-something social workers taking this on, and now we have 7 truancy officers, and how that will work together, being transparent, and also just me thinking, we need to start advertising that we have hired these people, so we can hopefully maybe have parents start self-correcting this absentee problem we have before we have to start prosecuting parents. But we have to start doing something.
Absolutely. I think that's a valid point. I think the only caveat I would add, and I've said this now a couple times when the topics come up, and I know the board is very receptive to staff, and you do hear from staff, especially those who feel like they're justified in requesting an elevation in their pay grade. Feeling that way and being justified in that are two very different things, and I think we have to be very careful, and that's why we've gone through the comprehensive process of reviewing the job descriptions to ensure that any recommendation we bring to you for those types of level changes are valid and should be done. But again, I shared this at a previous meeting, but belief that it should happen and it being necessitated by reality of what they actually do are two different things. And sometimes people are not that reflective of their own circumstance. They just assume, well, I've been here in Polk County for 20 years, I should be next to be taken care of. And that is part of the Polk culture. I'm going to put it out there. We want to take care of our people, and there's nothing wrong with being respectful and honoring and being loyal to those who've been loyal to the organization. I do not disagree at all, but it needs to be earned and justified, and that's something we have to be very careful of, because, and Ms. Fields, I believe, brought this issue up very early on when I started making recommendations for people's changes, and I tried to do them as quickly as I could get to them because I didn't want people to feel like we were pushing them off, and I felt that would serve as a signal. Ms. Fields was very adamant early on, Mr. Hyde, I'm worried that this may cause more issues than not, and that's what it's built into for some, is that, now they're reaching out saying, well, what about me, it's my turn, and I think that's why I'm trying to bring a comprehensive plan to you in May, that we can, and that will serve, to your point, Ms. Miller, that will serve as that level of transparency to say, here's how we're planning to address these over the next 18 to 24 months. So, Ms. Fields, Ms. Fortney and Ms. Fields, I know, so I'm Ms. Fortney.
I'd like to go back to what Ms. Miller said about the social workers and the truancy officers. Can you tell us exactly how that's going to roll out? Because our social workers already do intervention, right? So the truancy officers are going to be more investigative / enforcement to hold parents accountable. How does that roll back on our social workers, all 27 of them?
So actually what it does is it becomes a resource to the social worker, and I think you bring up a valid point. The limited number of current social workers cannot manage this, plus everything else they're trying to manage. And so what the truancy officers do is they fill that void. Because let's be honest, in the grand scheme of things, a social worker is focusing primarily on the social emotional well-being of their students and students who are currently in crisis. That attendance and absenteeism, I'm not saying this is true for all of them, that becomes a second thought. That's not a priority. Because if I'm overwhelmed in trying to support my students, I'm going to have to prioritize, as we do everything else in this world, where am I going to spend my time, where I'm going to have the most beneficial impact on my students, and where can I spend my energy? Because there are so few of them. But that's part of the staffing plan that needs to be addressed in the near future. So what the truancy officers will deal with is we will pre-identify, Mr. Butler and others will identify students who have had frequent and chronic absenteeism, patterns of absenteeism, patterns of tardiness, and then they in turn will work in tandem with the school and serve as a liaison and contact to the family and the student to create that plan. And they will monitor, along with the social workers, whether or not they're fulfilling that plan. And then, to Ms. Miller's point, that's when it becomes an escalation strategy. Our goal is not, even though we have the legal right, and I don't think that's changed since I left and came back to Florida, parents can actually face fines for their students not attending school. Our goal is for us not to be punitive towards families, but we've got to get families to understand it's incredibly important for their child to attend school regularly. And if you're missing 30, 40, 50 days a year, you share some responsibility in that. And we have, especially in the primary grades, unfortunately, we have families who keep children home, not because they're ill, not for any other reason other than it's a comfort thing. And we need to, this role is not just the enforcement aspect, it's the partnership, it's establishing expectations and monitoring and then making sure that we're escalating issues where needs are, but also working in tandem with the social worker because that family may need additional wraparound service supports through the community agencies so they can serve as liaison there as well.
Because don't our social workers actually do the identification and chase down these families? I mean, we have families that are living in a room one day. I don't think people realize the stress some of our families are under.
Correct.
You know, they're living in a room one day and then go to a different house another day and live in the room that night. And yeah, it's a heavy lift. And the other thing, can you compare the new truancy officers to the one back in the day that actually rounded the kid up and brought him into school?
So it's interesting.
I see Ms. Barnes smiling because she knows exactly what I'm talking about.
I didn't grow up in that. I've heard of that myth of this truancy officer will come get you. I think I saw that on Little Rascals maybe back in the day. Now I've aged myself.
Well,
wow, that was
Little
bad.
Rascals, wow.
That was bad, Little Rascals.
It did happen.
And I'm sure it did, but I think there's an aspect of this, and I can tell you that as a building principal, and I'll always give credit where credit's due. I learned this from the best. It was not uncommon to go knock on a door and say, let's go, we're going to school today. Get out of bed, get dressed, we're coming to get you. And I think we need that level of involvement with our families again. I think the truancy officers will help us in that regard. So
I could name the ones I went and drug and where they live still.
yeah, nowadays there are a little bit more concerns with making sure you're not traveling and transporting a student.
Right.
You know, especially if it's a female student and a male truancy officer, you want to be there are some safeguards we'll put in place there, but the emphasis is on improving attendance and, as a direct result, improving outcomes. So,
Gotcha.
Ms. Fields.
I think today's agenda was very full and heavy. I think that we need to have more time to talk about the organizational chart as well as the staffing plan.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to request that we look at having, even if it means that just a work session with nothing but this on the agenda. I think that the items here are so important until we have to have enough time to have good discussion. I'd also like to have data to understand. I know there's a need for truancy officers, I understand that, but the data, what brought us to this point? And then the 7, and how are they going to be distributed throughout the county as well? I know we've had a hearing officer before, and I would imagine maybe that person disappeared because of funding. I don't know. I don't remember why we discontinued having a hearing officer. I know that Mr. Butler basically has been a one-man person office for a while and adding, so I know that there's a need. I'm not saying that it's not. I just want to understand the 7.
Absolutely. Be more than happy to provide that for you. I can bring that back for the May 10th meeting, but additionally, I can speak with Ms. Wyatt. We can poll the board and see if a special workshop is required. Be more than happy to conduct a workshop or to address any individual questions or concerns that you have. I've been spending a lot of time with many of you on the phone talking about org chart questions. and other questions, and I know I still owe you a call about
we
another
haven't
topic.
done that yet.
And you've been very gracious, knowing that I was getting over a cold, so thank you. But we could definitely bring this back for further discussion. The org chart is not something that should be adopted and just, I don't want it rubber stamped. I think that everyone's prepared to justify what's in there at this moment because we feel in our students' best interests. And the last thing I'll say, and I stole this from Mr. Green, one of his conversations we had very recently, was nothing in our org chart is anything but reflective of our commitment to ensuring that it directly impacts student outcomes. There's no fluff in the org chart. It's all about ensuring that it's focused on our kids every day, and so I'm more than happy to provide the data to justify why we believe this is the right structure moving forward. And I think I addressed like the regional structure. It's so imperative. We've got some amazing building leaders, but I've got to give them the opportunities to keep growing. And by charging many of them who have been successful at turning around schools and strong academics, we're going to be empowering them to serve as mentors to others, formal mentors, with an entire process. We'll be revamping our leadership development process this summer. There's a lot going on that I would be more than happy to discuss at length further with the board and publicly. So thank you. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. And I know we're running short on time, but I just want to make sure that any changes that we think are coming for the staffing plan this year, are our schools going to have the time to hire for those positions if we wait until June for, I don't know what you're thinking as far as guidance counselors or those types of things, and we will be voting on it in June. It won't get pushed back any later than that.
No, it won't.
Okay.
But I think, again, part of this will be a conversation with the board, and once we've prioritized those, I'm not too concerned about, because we're going to have to chip away at it. It will not be a one and done. So I think there's enough bandwidth for us to address that, even if it's just rectifying similar scenarios like I used with Ms. Townsley's school, Willow Oak compared to a middle school. And that example, while I used it here, there are countless examples similar to that we could address in year one that directly impact student outcomes. So.
Okay. I just want to make sure that our schools have the appropriate amount of time to
Yes,
hire
ma'am.
for those positions. 'Cause
Absolutely.
Finding people is not always easy right now.
Yes,
so.
ma'am. I agree.
Thank you.
Ms. Miller.
Real quick, I agree with Ms. Fields. I'd like to see a work session on this, or at least time devoted to it.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not opposed to a secondary meeting. Neither is Jason. He'll be back. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Pitts and Mr. Warren spent a lot of time developing this, and there was a lot of back and forth. So I'm deeply appreciative. It's not the format that I was recently accustomed to. So I told them, I'll come to you. You don't have to come to me, and that's fine. And that's what's reflected here, because I wanted the board to be comfortable with the manner in which this was presented as being something you've seen in the past as well. So hopefully you found that to be true. Moving on then, I'll bring this item, Ms. Wyatt, you and I will have some conversation. Information items, there are 4 information items on there for your reference: a donation report, Head Start Services report, a quarterly report for the months of January 1st through March 31st, and a financial statement for the period ending February 28th. If there are any questions about those information items, I can bring staff forward. Seeing none. Ms. Wyatt, Board Agenda Review.
All righty.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Is everyone in the board agenda for this evening? All right. Opening items 1 through 3. Dr. Bruce Sabin will be doing the invocation before we start. Pledge of Allegiance. We will have Marcus Walker from, it does not say where he is. He's from 5th grade. We will find out. Section B, special recognitions. Any questions? Section C is public comments on agenda items. Section D in the minutes. Any questions on minutes? E is the consent.
Ms. Wyatt, can we go back to the special recognition, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I was given the proclamation to read today, and also I was asked to present it to whoever's going to be receiving it. So is it possible that maybe Ms. Fortney can do the presentation while I read the proclamation?
I just want to double check that's, because I thought we had somebody stepping forward.
There is someone stepping forward.
But, okay.
Marissa isn't present today.
Gotcha, so she's okay. Sure, Ms. Fortney, would you be okay reading that one?
No, she can read it.
Oh,
I can read it, excuse me, if you
If she
can
can-
present it.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's whatever you need me to do.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
So, let me ask.
Mhm.
I was asked to step down for the recognitions. Would you like to just go ahead and do it then tonight? Seems ridiculous to have two people. Ms. Fortney, would you like to do that?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I'm kind of caught off.
Would you like to go ahead and step down for all the recognitions?
That's fine, Ms. Cunningham. I don't, I'll do whatever the board wants me to do. Y'all know that.
Well, if you're going to step down for one,
All
I
right.
was asked to do that tonight, and I'm saying if you're already going to step down
Or
for
we can go
one.
the opposite way.
Yeah, there's actually several, so even Dr. Allen is asked to step down, or read the proclamation, excuse me. So if the board would like just one representative, we could do that.
It's fine.
So Ms. Fortney will do it.
That'd be great.
She's
Okay.
been voluntold.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yay. Thank you.
All right. Looking at the consent agenda, sections F through H.
Madam Chair, if I may, there were 3 revisions.
Thank you.
Item L3, Administrative and Instructional Personnel Actions, there was an updated attachment. Item Q4, naming of Bartow High School football field, or excuse me, Bartow High School field to John and Terry Frost Family Field at Bartow Memorial Stadium. There was an added attachment. If you recall, we asked for a summary of why that nomination and request was being made. And then item R1, public review for mathematics instructional materials, there was an item added. I know respectfully I'd like to comment on the mathematics instructional materials. That is just a notice of public review. However, Mr. Wilson inquired, and it's important for transparency, that this is, the materials that will be up for review will be those that are approved by the state of Florida. Several of our math adopted or recommendations for adopted materials did not pass the initial review by the state of Florida. However, and I know Mr. Wilson would probably ask this question for clarity during the meeting as well later, each one of the publishers just recently received feedback on why the state of Florida denied their materials, and they're being given an opportunity to amend those and resubmit for approval. So we are waiting for that process to take place. And so, again, the only materials that will be available for public review at this time will be those that were approved by the state of Florida. All others will remain vacant until such time as they either meet the criteria or we select and make a recommendation for an alternative to replace them.
Thank you. And Superintendent Hyde, you and I had discussed on F, new administrators. Are we not adding the laterals?
We again, historically, Mr. Warren had indicated to me we did not. If it's your preference, we can add that lateral.
I would appreciate that we do, anytime we're approving any, even if they're already a director or senior director, I think that name needs to come before the
Okay.
board, just so that we know that they're moving.
We can work to make
So if
that
we can get
adjustment.
those up, thank you.
Thank you.
And then consent agenda I through K. Consent agenda L through N.
I have,
Ms. Miller?
it can stay on the consent agenda, but we're adding money for OTs and PTs. And I think I talked to the superintendent about this. I just want to make it a public statement again. We're in desperate need of these. We're currently trying to provide speech therapy via iPad, small group, inside a kindergarten classroom, and that's not very effective. And so instead of having people change their IEPs to say one-on-one or adult to child, I'm hoping we can use these services to increase not virtual therapy, because that's very difficult for kindergarten 1 and 2, especially if you're trying to do small group. And I know we're in a shortage, so I'm not against spending dollars on this, if we're going to spend them for the supports needed, which are personal, in-person supports. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Any other on L through N? Consent agenda O, and there's nothing in P. All right. Section Q, action agenda. And Section R, public hearings. Superintendent's report. Fred, I'm assuming you have a report for us?
I will, yes, ma'am.
And then Wes, do you have a report for us?
Don't believe so.
Okay. And Ms. Matthews, do you have a report for us? Okay. And then we'll go to board member reports and then the public comments on agenda items. Any questions? Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wyatt. It's not a question. I wanted to apologize to the board for not being here. I got bit by a dog. Yeah, so, I apologize.
I don't mean to laugh.
It was not funny, trust me.
Were you trying to hand in your homework or something? What?
I was trying to be nice.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to, before we did the rest of it.
No, we
let you know.
are glad that it wasn't more serious than it was
Yeah, it
and
was
that
bad
you are
enough.
with us today. So.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll go back to the work session. So, new business, one thing Superintendent Hyde and I would like to bring up is that looking at the meeting calendar for this fall, we have a meeting currently scheduled on November 8th, which is Election Day. Historically, we have not met on Election Day, at least for the past several cycles. So would like to move that meeting to the following week, which I believe is November 15th. So we'll schedule that for the week following, not to interfere with elections. Okay. And then beyond that, Superintendent Hyde has sent out a few different scheduling things. If you have any questions about scheduling things that our secretary send out after Superintendent Hyde and I speak with them, my understanding under Sunshine is you are allowed to contact me about something that's a scheduling question, and you also can contact Superintendent Hyde. So if you have any questions about any of the scheduling things, please contact one of us. We would appreciate it. I think that's all I have. Anything else from you, Superintendent Hyde?
No, ma'am, I'll address some other things in the superintendent's report this evening. We've got some great things to recognize, and then we've got some upcoming events that we want to make sure everybody's aware of.
Thank you. And then quickly, we'll go around any board updates from either committee meetings or different events that you've been to. Everyone is so quiet today. All right.
I did want to, just as an opportunity, going back to our earlier conversation on the book evaluation process, I don't know if it's proper in the context of this in our comment. It was quoted earlier in some press about the ease for parents to determine access, to certain materials through that Destiny system. Clearly, that's not the case. I'd be interested, Superintendent Hyde, if I can get the contract of the Destiny system, and then as we implement our system, are we planning to demo that for parents moving forward before we implement it?
Yes, sir. There's a conversation, as silly as it sounds, there's a First Amendment issue at hand that I need to address with Mr. Bridges, and so long as that doesn't become a conflict, absolutely that will be incorporated.
Okay.
Because we intend on doing the same thing with one-to-one devices. So I don't see why we could not, but I just want to make sure we cover all our bases.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I was thinking about the open enrollment. Traditionally, it would close out, at the end of this month. And we made some big strides as a board. So maybe an update on how that first cycle went, the controlled open enrollment cycle, as it closes out, and then moving forward, what that's going to look like, just to keep that forward in front of the board so we can be informed on that.
Ms. Fortney?
Thank you, Dr. Allen. It reminded me. I wanted to ask for an update when you have a chance and staff on Hazel Health.
That update.
Okay.
Yep.
We are averaging 800 visits a month at this point. Been incredibly successful.
Mental health or?
I will provide you with the breakdown. Right now it's about 60-40. However, of the 60, which are physical health visits, they're finding there's a percentage within there that are not physical health referrals. They are actually mental health referrals, so the data's a little skewed, but I'll provide that breakdown for you.
Every school I go to, I ask, and they love it.
I continue to get emails from staff who are not easy initial implementers, and But I know Dr. Allen has asked me to ensure that we're going to provide an update, that we're getting our money's worth out of that, and I'm very pleased with our current utilization.
Anyone else have anything for the good of the order? All right, with no further business, we will adjourn this meeting, and if we can clear the room, we have discipline.